Hello and welcome once again to fSobriety. I am Craig Woods and this podcast is very important and it involves something you know about, and that's enough said about that.
And I am James Hamilton and my attitude is none of your fucking business.
I'm Alan Todd and has anybody seen Billy?
All of which means we are once again here to talk Twin Peaks: The Return, on this occasion Twin Peaks: The Return, specifically Part 7.
Hooray!
Guys, how are we all feeling about diving into Part 7 of The Return?
I'm pretty psyched. It was an episode filled with things that I'd forgotten happened.
Yeah, I think one of the major things that we'll come to talk to just as we get down the pike here is I'd forgotten just how much actually happens in this episode in terms of actual plot development, which is not something we got in the previous 2 or 3 episodes.
It almost seems like a standard television episode with just some mad shit that pops up in the middle of it.
Yeah. By David Lynch standards, this is pretty radical for all the reasons he's usually not radical. So, yeah, that is what we're here to discuss. We have a wee bit of housekeeping to do before we get to that, however. So, regular listeners to the podcast, hello and welcome once again. New listeners, hello and welcome for the first time.
Shout out to Argentina.
Yes, indeed, and a special welcome to listeners in Argentina. Listeners plural, because I believe there is more than one of you.
Yeah.
So, James, we do have some news about the format of the podcast going forward.
We do. So as regular listeners will know, our podcasts, at the beginning, our first couple episodes, I think, were somewhere around the 2.5 hour mark.
Standard podcast length, you might say.
And as we went on, they've gotten slightly out of hand.
Critics would say wildly out of control, but I cannot possibly comment.
What we've done is we've made a conscious decision here at fSobriety Incorporated to try and rein in our episode lengths a little. For a little context, when we began this podcast, it was during the very depths of the pandemic and of quarantine. And for myself, who, as the editor of the podcast, I was basically not working because I was self-employed. I still am. So I had a lot more, shall we say, free time to edit stuff, as well as record. And also, we weren't really seeing anyone else, so...
We're now seeing other podcasts.
We're in an open podcasting relationship.
We each had a captive audience of each other.
So what we've decided is, in the interest of maintaining a sort of semi-regular release schedule in the after times that I guess we're in now...
Touch wood, we'll see what happens. Yeah. Aye.
We are going to rein in our episode length, so expect episodes to be around 2 to 2.5 hours max from here on out.
Which is still pretty generous lengthwise. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts I listen to that is still significantly less than that, so we're doing okay. We're just trying to rein it in a wee bit.
And this goes, by the way, I should say, across the board for our episodes from here on out.
Yep.
With the exception of our end-of-year episode, which we can make no promises about.
No. Our end-of-year podcast will be coming in December, and it is sure to be a bumper feast of as yet indeterminate length.
You've got to accommodate all my bullshit. So.
We'll keep you posted on that.
Yep.
So the plan going forward, this and our next episode, in which we will be discussing Twin Peaks: The Return Part 8, that will be our last Twin Peaks: The Return episode for a little while. We will be wrapping it up until January, so we will be coming back and doing more Twin Peaks coverage in the new year. So those of you who have hopped on board for Twin Peaks: The Return coverage, first of all, thank you very much. We hope you're enjoying the journey as much as we are. we will be back, as I say, January. So please do stick around or come back. Between now and then, we will be covering other things, including Season 3 of Doom Patrol, which is due to air, yes, the end of next month.
September 23rd, I believe. The first 3 episodes are airing.
So if that's not your thing, then by all means, you can bow out of the podcast while we cover that. But please do come back in the new year for when we're discussing Twin Peaks. And, of course, if you fancy listening to us count down our favourite things from the year, then by all means, enjoy the feast of our end of year episode when that arrives.
Whiskers on kittens, warm woolen mittens.
Alan's had a sneak preview of our end of year list.
And also, with that in mind, we would just say that if you're still waiting on us to get back to Mr. Robot, we're going to begin Season 2 of Mr. Robot in January. Probably, most likely, alternating episodes of Twin Peaks, The Return, and Mr. Robot.
Yeah, that's the plan. So from January forward, we will be putting out, it'll still be 2 episodes a month, and the plan is you get 1 Twin Peaks episode and 1 Mr. Robot episode each month. And that will be for the foreseeable until something else arrives to interrupt our flow, whether a new show arrives or whatnot. But that is the basic plan for now. So we thought we would alert you all and let you know that's what's happening. So if you're enjoying the journey, again, thank you so much. And hopefully that gives you some indication of where and when to catch up with us, depending on what you feel like listening to. But as I say, any of y'all listening to anything that we do, we are always massively appreciative.
Yes, we are. Thank you very much for listening. As you may have guessed from the quality of our podcast, we are not professional podcasters. This is basically a hobby for us, and we thank you for joining us on our
Ruining the
journey.
illusion, James. We had them all fooled.
And for one final note for listeners, we've enjoyed having Alan with us so much these last few episodes that we're keeping him.
Yeah, he's ours now. We're not letting him go.
We're locking him up in our fSobrieTV cupboard.
Guys.
Sorry, Big Glasgow Comic Page. He's never coming back, and that's why he's never appearing there ever again.
You guys over at the Big Glasgow Comic Page can just listen to the fireworks when we get to our end of year list, and I've got Zack Snyder's Justice League in my top 10 movies.
Big love and respect to the guys over at Big Glasgow Comic Page, but your loss is our gain.
So please join us in welcoming Alan by continuing to listen to the podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Alright, so before we get to the business of Twin Peaks: The Return Part 7, we do have to pause, as we always do at the start of the podcast these days, to discuss any other business in the form of any other TV shows, movies, music, or any other cultural phenomena that has caught our attention of late. So that being the case, I'm going to hand over briefly to our resident AI, the Hamiltron, who will direct you to the point in the podcast for those of you who wish to skip that portion and just get down to the Twin Peaks business, where exactly in the podcast you should go. Hamiltron, over to you.
Tell him about it. Hit him where it hurts.
Hello again, dear listener. If you're only joining us to listen to our in-depth analysis of Twin Peaks: The Return, Part 7, there's a body alright, you may wish to skip ahead to 51 minutes and 30 seconds to hear that. Or, alternatively, you could just listen to the entirety of the podcast we worked so very hard to make for you. You goddamn ingrate.
Thank you, Hamilton. A treat, as always. James, Alan, what you all been up to? What's been grabbing your eyes, ears, hearts and souls?
Now that I've left the Big Glasgow Comic Page podcast, I have now started reading comics again for some strange reason, and I've been reading...
I like your style, Alan.
Fucking absolute contrarian, clearly.
You're literally the Christopher Hitchens of this podcast.
Thank you. I've been catching up on stuff that I've been meaning to read for ages now, and there's been one particular series which I've been meaning to catch up on, which is Monstress, it's called. I don't know if any of you've come across this one.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
I've heard the title, but I don't know what it is.
It's pretty good. You'll love it, Craig. It's like a fantasy thing crossed with like steampunk and stuff. Like it's like sounds like all your favourite shit. There's cats.
You'll be telling me next that Nick Cave does the soundtrack.
Yeah, Nick Cave does the soundtrack. The CIA wrote it, and also it's all your favourite stuff. But Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda are the creators of it. So Marjorie Liu is the writer, and Sana Takeda is the artist. And the art is beautiful. The writing is is very nice as well. Like, I've not read much of Marjorie Liu's stuff, but going by this, I'll be digging out some of her other work. And I can't recommend the book highly enough. I don't want to give anything away. Safe to say, like, if you like anime and like manga and stuff like that, I would assume you'd probably like this just because of the kind of style of it. There's like people who are part fox and part wolf and rabbit and stuff like that, and cats with like a number of different tails who speak.
This sounds unchristian, and I do not approve.
I am your furry pleased to hear that.
Aye, it's very cool. I'm not selling it. I realise that. I wasn't prepared to speak about it in the slightest. I just remembered that that's what I've been doing. So Monstress by Image. I'm on volume 3, which collects issues 13 to 18, and I'm digging it. So yeah, that's what happened.
Nice. Sweet. I think I've heard it being spoken about in one of the like Critical Role D&D podcasts.
I would imagine they would love that. Aye.
First of all, gay. Second of all, stupid.
I have been on what I'm calling a Craig Wood style 2021 movie catch up of late.
Yep.
Catching up on films.
Yeah,
I think you and I have watched a bunch of several movies that are the same films.
Yeah, we've definitely crossed over into the same territory here and there. Yeah, I've been making up for all of 2020 where I hardly watched any movies, and I've watched a whole ton. But yeah, I know from our conversations recently that we've watched some of the same stuff.
Before we get into those films, though, I'm just going to bring up one that you guys spoke about in the previous episode. I watched Nobody. And
sweet, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. Highly recommended.
It's so a great fun, hills a poppin' action movie with a wicked sense of humour.
It had a 3-man shootout that I didn't know I needed to see those 3 people in the same room killing bad guys.
Yes, so good.
Hot new hip hop group just dropped.
Yeah, about to drop the project of the summer.
Other than that, I watched Mortal Kombat.
Oh, I tried to warn you against it.
I think I'm the only one who hasn't seen this now.
It is one of the worst films I've seen in years.
It's really fucking bad. It's, you know what, man, it's a film that has no right being as bad as it is, because normally when movies of that sort of genre are bad, they're usually bad in a kind of enjoyable way, whereas that movie is just 100% joyless. Am I right?
It is. It takes itself absolutely seriously, and yet it misses the one thing you need in a Mortal Kombat movie, which is a Mortal Kombat tournament. Yes. There's no Mortal Kombat tournament in the Mortal Kombat movie.
Do you think the scriptwriters got to the end, it's like, oh, we're done, and then just suddenly looked at each other and went, oh shit! Maybe they won't notice.
They looked at the title page again and went, oh, guys.
Dropped a bollock here, mate.
Mortal Kombat 0? Like...
Yeah,
Stop writing things for the sequel. Just give us a good film the first time round. Jesus Christ.
It's unfeasibly bad.
And it ends on we're doing a sequel, which I don't think they're going to get.
No, I think it's Dunzo Washington.
World of Warcraft.
Even the violence, even the action scenes are not good. You think you have one job, Mortal Kombat, but the action scenes are shot in such a leaden fashion that I was just like, there literally is no joy I can glean from this movie.
Yeah.
Sounds like every Street Fighter film, like they're all pish as well, and for the same reason. They're all missing a Mortal Kombat tournament is the reason that the Street Fighter films are all pish.
Anyway, 0 5s out of 9 for Mortal Kombat.
Yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, I saw what I think might be my film of the year. It's going to take some beating.
Can I guess what it is?
Yes, you can.
Is it Psycho Goreman?
Yes, it is. It's PG Psycho Goreman.
That looks so good!
It might be my film of the year.
We both watched it.
I went into it with little to no expectations, and I came out of it in pain, laughing.
Same.
I saw the trailer and I was like, that looks like a Power Rangers villain, and I'm here for it. Like, it looks so good.
You're not wrong.
Yep.
It is a legitimately hugely entertaining movie in all of the ways, funnily enough, that Mortal Kombat is not. It's a hills a poppin' thrill ride of just some of the most childish humour, but mixed with a kind of very sort of wry cynicism. And yeah, one of my favourite things is it appears to be set in present day, and yet the entire aesthetic of it is 100% early 90s.
Clearly written by someone who has respect and affection for that genre of 80s and 90s kids movies where children befriend an alien.
Flight of the Navigator and stuff.
Yeah. And simultaneously all the very schlocky gore of the type that you would find in the trauma films back in the day.
Yep, absolutely.
It's very much a melange of those things. It also, I have to say, it features what I think is one of the standout performances on screen I've ever seen by a child actor. The wee girl in it is an incredible actor. Either that or she is literally a lunatic. I think the thing I said to you, James, afterwards was, is that wee lassie a great actor, or did they literally just find an insane child to play that role?
She is amazing.
A little from column A, a little from column B.
She either has an incredibly bright future in movies or
she's the next Azalea Banks.
You would definitely enjoy it, Alan.
I'm giving it 9 5s out of 9.
Nice. Oh.
You heard it here first. You literally heard that here first.
Psycho Goreman, film of the year, nay, decade.
A movie I watched, which I know both of you guys have seen, is, as the MC at the Roadhouse would say, proud to present, not Suicide Squad, but The Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I have to say, against many of my expectations, I found this a really enjoyable movie.
I did love that Pauly Shore came back for it as well. Like, that was cool.
I have to do my usual thing, James. I have to get the caveat in. Ignoring the fact that there is the bit of imperialist propaganda, the fact that we're in a Latin American country that even needs, quote-unquote, needs military intervention is itself a form of propaganda, regardless of how much John Cena is made out to be the bad guy. But like, it was one of those weird things. The regime in the island nation, which the name of which escapes me now, some combination of
Spanish or Spanish.
Yes. The regime is deliberately outlined as being neither socialist nor specifically capitalist nor specifically anything, except that they do still wear military uniforms. But you know, it is that way where the thing that bothered me early in the movie was like, okay, so it's fine now to say that they don't even have any ideologies down there. They're all just a bit crazy in that part of the world, so it doesn't really matter. That did bother me early in the movie. And also the fact that the flag of the country is like a deliberate combination of the Cuban and Venezuelan flags, I noticed.
Vuvuzela?
Like, quite. So that was bothering me. But once I'd silenced that part of me as much as I possibly can, it was actually pretty enjoyable. Great cast, a lot of great fun, and here's the weird thing, and I know I said this to you, James, this is really I've largely avoided the DC movies.
Good call.
Right, aye. But I was always more of a Marvel kid growing up than I was a DC kid, so I never had the same affection for DC, so I was never as invested in the idea of seeing the DC movies. And then when I heard the reports and saw the trailers and whatnot, I was like, I don't know that I would ever want to see those movies, even if I was a DC kid. So I kind of avoided them. And I know that the first Suicide Squad movie was not well received at all.
Straight garbage, fam.
Yep, hot trash.
I was really taken by surprise by, first and foremost, and the whole cast is great, and I'll mention a couple more in a second, but first and foremost, I was really surprised by just how much I absolutely fucking love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn.
Yep.
Because I have zero relationship with that character whatsoever, because I'd stopped reading comics by the time she appeared.
I said this to someone the other day. I hate Harley Quinn, and I fucking love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, so...
Right, I think I'm in the same boat, even though I don't really have any experience like with cartoon or comic Harley Quinn. But oh my god, Margot Robbie is so entertaining in that role. She is just so much fun. And every moment she's on screen is just an absolute delight. And just quick fast forward to another movie I'm going to mention in just a bit. But James did say to me when I said this to him, if you enjoyed her in that, you might enjoy Birds of Prey. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a look. So I watched Birds of Prey last week. 8 5s out of 9. Great movie. Absolutely loved it. Loved it, mate.
Agreed.
A lot of fun.
Up until the Suicide Squad, that was my favourite DC film, like by far. And by that, I mean it's the only one that I didn't actually hate. So
I enjoyed the Birds of Prey significantly more than I enjoyed the Suicide Squad, but I enjoyed both of them.
What I loved about Birds of Prey was not only is Margot Robbie great as Harley Quinn, but I really enjoyed, this is a callback to early F-Sobriety episodes, I really enjoyed seeing Journey Smollett in something that I was enjoying watching.
Right, yes.
Because she's always been great.
She is great, yeah.
I think she's fantastic in Birds of Prey as well. And yeah, Birds of Prey was just so much fun.
It's a whole lot of fun. I remember, put it this way, it's not often this happens, but about 15 minutes for the end of the film, I just clicked on the button to see how much was left, and I actually found myself audibly going, "Oh, it's nearly finished." I was just having so much fun with it. But the whole cast is so great. Like Ewan McGregor as the cartoon villain,
coked up Black Mask is brilliant. Yes,
amazing. He absolutely hammed it up for all it was worth, and I was 100% here for it.
Fuck off! These are my things.
National treasure, Ewan McGregor, acting the 100% ham.
So yeah, it is so funny that on the one side of DC, you've got the quote-unquote Snyderverse, you know. I guess that Aquaman's included in that as well, and everything's all like really dark and really serious.
Yeah.
And then as you're like, that can get in the fucking bin, because over on the other side you've got the Suicide Squad, you've got Birds of Prey, and I don't know if you've seen Shazam.
I've not, no.
I really enjoyed Shazam as well. I thought that was really fun. And
Shazam and Aquaman are kind of moving out of the shite into the good part, like with the Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey for me, but the rest of it can just go suck a fuck.
So yeah, I think that if they continue to sort of mix it up, maybe I'll even like some more, but I think Birds of Prey, I would say, is definitely my favourite.
I really want a Birds of Prey sequel. It really left me feel like I wanted more of that.
Unfortunately, I think there's no chance. I don't think it
does
at all.
I gathered that. I'm not expecting one, but I really want one.
Release the Birds of Prey 2!
You could investigate the live-action 90s Birds of Prey TV show.
I am dimly aware that that's a thing.
I remember that, yeah. Never seen it, but I remember it being a thing.
But one of the things I said to you, James, while I was watching Birds of Prey, was it really just struck me that the humour and the aesthetic of that film is not really that far removed from Doom Patrol. I mean, Doom Patrol's still a bit crazier, but
a lot crazier.
I feel it's a lot crazier, but I don't feel like it's that far a jump to imagine that those characters exist in the same universe.
Oh, please give me Robot Man meets Harley Quinn. Like, oh my God.
That exactly. I really want a Margot Robbie cameo in Doom Patrol. It's never going to happen, but it would be fucking amazing.
I'm going to make another case for you to maybe check out the Harley Quinn animated show. It's not Margot Robbie that voices Harley Quinn in said show, but the character is more similar than the character in the Batman animated series or other portrayals, and I just think the Harley Quinn animated series is great. It's so good.
I keep meaning to watch it, but I've not come across it yet.
Is that the one with Alan Tudyk as the Joker?
Yeah, and it's been referenced in Doom Patrol.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's right.
So he got a gig in some cartoon bullshit. Yeah, I remember
that. What other films have we seen lately that we were talking about? There was Garth Marenghi's Censor.
Yeah, the movie that I described as Garth Marenghi's Inland Empire.
Yeah, so good.
I watched it again in Alan's company because I decided he had to see it as well. Yeah, I am all over that movie. I think it's, put it this way, I'm definitely going to be talking about it again in the end of year episode. I think Prano Bailey Bond, the director, is definitely one to watch. I think there's just such a flair in that movie. And to anyone who is not aware of the movie Censor, to give a brief description, it's set in 1980s Britain and it deals with a censor, as the title suggests.
And not the kind of rock rap group of the early 90s.
Nobody remembers that.
I remember.
Shout out to Matt if he's listening, he knows.
It's set in the video nasty era, and to anyone outside the UK to whom that means nothing, all I can say is the 1980s culturally in the UK was a really strange time where there was legitimate moral panic over the availability of horror films on VHS.
In the US, they had a similar thing, but it was the Satanic Panic in the US. Yeah, it was around the same time.
Yeah, over here it was anything that was vaguely violent that was available for video rental or sale. There was a huge cultural panic about that directly being responsible for any violent crime that ever occurred. And there were numerous cases that even went to court, all of which ended up with that there was no connection ever found or ever proven, because obviously that's not a thing. Suffice to say, the body in charge of censoring video rental films and giving them age appropriate certificates is the British Board of Film Classification, which still exists and still does that job, but it's not nearly the reactionary hidebound organisation that it was in the 1980s, I think it's fair to say. But yeah, that specific time in the 80s, very strange time. But this movie takes place in that era and deals with one of those people who is very, very righteous in her job and sees it as being absolutely a moral responsibility to protect people from content that could be potentially influencing people to do terrible things.
We could have used with her now because, we've had like so many Zack Snyder films. Like when I go on my inevitable rampage, like I'm going to use this as my defense.
But the ingenious thing about this movie is that the title actually has a double meaning, because it also, in fact, this is where I think fans of Twin Peaks and David Lynch would really dig parts of this movie. It's not really a spoiler, because you learn right at the start of the film that she does have a traumatic event in her past that she cannot totally remember. Our parents actually say in one of the early scenes in the movie, you've never been sure about what happened, and you've never been able to tell us clearly what happened. So there is this idea that the word censor also refers to the protagonist's ability to either remove information she cannot deal with from her memory or just be unable to kind of retrieve it. And that becomes a big crux of the movie. But the first half of the movie is done very much... for a low-budget film, I actually was very impressed with how well it recreated the era. And it done it in a lot of very subtle ways. That's what me and Alan were saying when we were watching it. It's like, how many earth tones can you fit on screen at one time? But it does it in very subtle ways. But it's one of the few movies, honestly, that when I watched it, I really felt that I was transported back to that era of my childhood. I was like, Christ, this is how I remember the world looking at that point. So yeah, full marks for that. But then the second half, without spoiling anything, it borrows a lot from 70s and 80s exploitation movies. There's a lot of giallo in there, and it's used in such an ingenious, inventive way. It's also a very humorous film, but nonetheless, the final 10-15 minutes, while on the one level they are kind of humorous and a bit ridiculous, they are also profoundly disturbing. And there's a few images towards the end that I'm like, okay, I'm laughing on top, but that's just because I really feel like cowering in a corner inside.
Yeah, I was laughing solidly for like the last 10 minutes, but not because it was stupid and not because it was overtly funny. It was just like, like, this is insane.
Also, Michael Smiley gives like one of the creepiest and most hilarious performances of his career. So good. Yeah,
he only has 2 brief scenes, but he makes the most of them. He's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, very well cast. I will just flat out say 9 5s out of 9 for me for Censor. I really thought it was a great movie.
Loved it.
Yep, for sure.
Speaking of Michael Smiley, I will just make a quick mention of another movie I watched that also starred Michael Smiley in a small role. However, don't get too excited, because the movie in question is Gunpowder Milkshake, which is an action movie starring Karen Gillan in the lead role as a professional assassin, with her other assassin, well, not quite friends, but associates, shall we say, via her mother, who was also an assassin. The cast includes, as assassins, Angela Bassett, Carla Gugino, Michelle Yeoh, and Lena Headey.
Okay, all believable as assassins.
And I know now you're all thinking to yourselves, how could this movie go wrong? Well, I'll tell you one way it went wrong. Most of that cast have almost nothing to do until about the last 20 minutes. And for the bulk of the movie, we spend it with Karen Gillan, who, bless her, I've seen her in enough things to think she's a decent actress, but I'm just going to come out and say she is woefully miscast in this role, because she has to be the least convincing badass I've seen on screen since Danny Dyer. It is not good. She is so awkward in this role. Every moment on screen, she's just so awkward. And yeah, it's a shame. It's a great idea for a movie, and I feel it should have been a lot better than it was. Even at the final 20 minutes or so where things kind of kick off. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of action before that, but it's with the caveat of Karen Gillan is just not believable in those scenes. But the last 20 minutes when the other characters actually get to do stuff, unfortunately, there's just some quite badly directed action sequences. And I will just say this, the part specifically involving Angela Bassett, who is my fave and is the one I was really looking forward to, is just kind of very poorly directed to the point where I could barely make out what was actually happening on screen. I was like, why did I wait for this? Yeah, there's a wee bit. There is stuff to recommend it. There's some funny moments. It's not a terrible film. It's just very, very meh. And if you go into it looking forward to some kick-ass action from those great action ladies, you are going to be disappointed. It does have some of the best cinematography I've seen. That is one thing that really struck out at me. Like, everything is awash in neon throughout the entire movie, and it does look absolutely amazing. But unfortunately, it's one of those classic cases where the style over substance is just not all there. It's just not working.
It's very much looking forward to it.
It's really, really disappointing when you get a great cast like that and they're just wasted, which is why I've renamed Gunpowder Milkshake Gunpowder Cast Waste. But that all said, if we want to just quickly wrap up with a quick mention of some other movies we've seen. Speaking of great actors and great roles, I know this is a movie Alan and I have both seen because we watched it together, me for a second time. One of our great actors of all time.
Porky?
I will fight anyone who says otherwise. Mr. Nicolas Cage in Pig. Have you seen it, James?
I've not seen it yet.
It's really great. And I think all three of us love all shades of Cage. We're all here for the crazy Cage rage. But what we haven't maybe had enough of in recent years is the more sedate Cage. And seeing him doing that for the first time in ages, I'm like, yeah, I actually forget just what range Nicolas Cage actually has. He brings a certain real kind of existential pathos to these quieter roles.
When you're talking about range now, you should maybe just say, like, on the Cage scale, like, because he goes from, as you say, like, the more kind of sedate and quiet ones, which we see in Pig, to off the fucking chain. Like, so he is the scale now. Like, you've got the Richter scale, which I'm assuming is named after somebody called Richter. Not the guy from the New Mutants and whatnot.
It's named after Max Richter, the composer.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. His baselines were so heavy that he was like causing fault lines to start acting up across the planet. So yeah, I figured it was probably that guy.
Pig is a really beautifully made drama. It's a very economical but very poetic piece of filmmaking. It's just a really lovely bit of filmmaking. There's some great comedy moments in it, but they're so kind of gentle. And then when there's moments where that gentleness gets to peak a little bit. But I pointed them out to Alan as we were watching it. I was like, I love how they just cut that off there. Because there's moments where a character starts getting angry and they literally cut it off what that character is saying, like in the middle of a sentence, and it goes down to the next scene. And it's such a powerful tool, and it does it several times. It's almost as if this film is almost literally saying, rage occurs in this universe, but that's not what we're focusing on. We just need you to know that it occurred, kind of thing. Which is why the casting of Cage almost acts as a meta tool in the movie itself, because Cage comes with all that baggage. We all know how crazy Cage can be. And for anybody who's not familiar with the plot of this movie, basically Nicolas Cage lives out in the middle of nowhere by himself, completely isolated, just him and his pig, and his pig hunts for truffles, and he sells the truffles at great expense to very kind of fancy restaurant owners. And then his pig gets stolen, and so he ventures into the city to try and find and retrieve his pig. But there's so many weird, obscure details in this world. Like, one of my favourite things, and this isn't spoiling too much, but
underground fight.
There is such a thing as an underground fight club exclusively for restaurant workers, which the staging of it is just so weird and so beautiful. Like, okay, cool. This movie is just operating on another offbeat level.
It was at this point that I figured we were just going to get like a bloody rampage of revenge kind of thing. So I just like started talking shit through this really beautiful film. And at the end of the film, when it finished and it didn't live up to my warped expectations, I was like, really sorry for talking shit through that. That was great.
It's like John Wick, but without any of the action.
Yeah, exactly that.
So yeah, highly recommend that. That's another 9.5 out of 9 from me for Pig.
That'll do, Woods.
Another of our great living actors, Mr. Mads Mikkelsen. I had a double bill recently where I watched back to back Another Round and Riders of Justice.
I saw Riders of Justice.
Both are incredible movies, both 9.5s out of 9. And Big Mads, seriously, one of the best. He's so great. He can go from being extremely subtle to being quite the opposite, extremely mannered. But everything he does it feels true, and he can emote just by doing very little. He's just an incredible presence on screen. And those two movies particularly really play to his strengths. Both really kind of profound and emotional in their own ways. Al, you've seen Riders of Justice. You'll be able to back this up. On the surface, it's kind of seems like it's going to be a kind of standard revenge thriller / buddy movie, but it has so much more going on in it. There's so many obscure little details in it. There's so many unresolved little subplots in it. And the tone of it is very, very strange, but in a good way. Although not if you're Mark Kermode. I did notice Mark Kermode was not that keen on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said he did not like the tone because he wasn't sure when he was meant to laugh and when he was meant to take it seriously. And I actually quite liked that about it. It was a mixed bag, but I was fine with it. Because there's a moment where there's a very, very serious thing. Well, first of all, this very serious thing happens right at the start. And then it's a very, very serious revelation very close to the end that is so grave. The weight of it is so grave. But at the same time, you might know what I'm talking about, Alan. It's when that revelation happens, it quickly flicks to another scene in another part of the world that clarifies that revelation.
Yes.
And that scene is played for laughs. And it's like, whoa, wait, whoa, hold on. And it is a bit whiplash in terms of tone, but I actually quite liked it. I felt like it had a lot to say about the general absurdity of life when it's at its most heightened, you know. But yeah, great movie, highly recommended.
Mads Mikkelsen, extremely believable as a badass as well.
Incredible. It's another incredible performance.
Also loved how it was like kind of like Danish Punisher with like 3 microchips. That was pretty cool. Yeah,
they reminded me of the lone gunman from the X-Files. But with much weirder backstories. With backstories from a Todd Solondz script. I want to make quick mention of another 2 movies I just watched recently as well. I watched Night of the Kings, which I think you've seen, Alan.
Yep.
Which is an Ivorian fantasy kind of movie, but it's set in a prison. And it is actually based on a real-life prison on the Ivory Coast. But it's a fantasy in the sense that it's set in a sort of alternate present where the inmates basically run this prison. And there's like all kinds of weird customs that take place when the head of the prison is about to die and they have to choose a new head of the prison. And there's this new inmate arrives and he's chosen as the kind of storyteller / seer type figure. And the movie's plot kind of veers between what's going on in the prison and the fantasy world of what this young inmate is telling them in the form of a fantasy story. And the way they intertwine. It's a really beautiful piece of filmmaking. So many great little enigmas in it that when it ends, you're like, I'm not 100% sure what all the symbolism in that movie meant, but I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. Also has some really beautiful affecting performances in it, so highly recommended. The other movie I watched just last week is a Guatemalan movie called La Llorona. And I've mentioned La Llorona as a concept on this podcast before, James. La Llorona is a Latin American folk myth that occurs in various different forms across most Latin American countries. And in most forms, basically, if you hear La Llorona sobbing, it means you're cursed. And
I was going to say, is it kind of a banshee type thing? But it's like a similar kind of vibe
in some versions, but what most of the versions have in common is that she is a wronged woman in some ways, and that she's lost her children either because they were murdered or they were taken from her, or because she has killed them in her own grief and insanity. This movie, it actually plays around with political fact in Guatemala quite a lot. I won't go into too much detail. I'll save it for the end of year episode because I'm definitely going to be talking about this again. But suffice to say, it combines Guatemala's own political history with the supernatural, and it's actually a really effective horror film for that reason. And it's just as much a domestic drama, but it's a domestic drama very specifically about a former dictator of the country who is now trapped inside. He and his family are now trapped inside their mansion, surrounded by protesters who want him to go back on trial because he needs to be found guilty for genocide. And while that's happening, that's when he begins to be quote-unquote haunted by La Llorona. And then there is a new maid who arrives, and it turns out, or starts to be suggested, that she and La Llorona are one and the same. And it plays a great balancing act between political commentary, domestic drama, and some seriously really creepy moments. And it's a very clever trick it plays, because you want this dictator to be punished, so you shouldn't really be feeling afraid for him. But because of just the way it's staged, and particularly if you're familiar in any way with Guatemala's history and or with the La Llorona myth, there's a lot there that's just so really affecting on a very, very raw level. Yeah, I thought it was an amazing film. It was 90 minutes long. That felt longer for the best reasons. It's because there were moments in it where I was like, I had my fingernails digging into the palms of my hands. I was like, this scene is, I really want this scene to end now. But yeah, great movie. I will be talking about it again in the end of the year.
Cool. That has been film, whatever year those films came out. Cue the music. Let's talk televisions, though.
Wait, James, is this an episode of fSobrieTV, the podcast in which we discuss all things contemporary television?
Is that not just F-sobriety?
Just roll with it. We don't have a podcast within a podcast.
All right, okay. Cue the music.
Hello and welcome to fSobrieTV, the podcast within a podcast that I just made up this very second, in which we apparently discuss contemporary television. James, you were about to tell us about a thing you've watched.
Yes. Well, thing one, I caught up on the Kevin Smith run Masters of the Universe that we were talking about the last episode of F-Sobriety.
What'd you think?
I didn't care about it at all.
I gave up after the first episode.
Seems to be the consensus.
I watched all 5 episodes of the first part of the season, and I mean,
it's very much that's a thing I've seen now.
The only entertainment value I took from it was Henry Rollins as Triclops was funny because it was Henry Rollins, but other than that,
I didn't even know it was Henry Rollins.
But other than that, I was like, it was a great big shrug, is what it was.
Yeah. It was thoroughly
my kind of thoughts on the first episode. I was like, do I really want to watch any more of this? The answer was no.
What I did instead was I saw the first couple episodes when it first came out and then never watched any more of it. So I'm currently catching up on She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
I was saying the same thing. Like, I watched the first episode like yonks ago and I loved it, but didn't watch any more. So that's my next thing as well. Definitely, you've inspired me.
She-Ra and the Princesses of Power is fantastic. That's how you update an 80s cartoon of that style. It's
go woke, go broke.
It is light-hearted, but it still has stakes. It's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously.
So literally all the things the Kevin Smith cartoon is.
Yep, the characters are instantly endearing across the board. It's just really, it's fantastic.
Did you ever think you would be saying, though, about a Kevin Smith thing, oh man, it took itself too seriously?
Nope.
I know that is. I mean, I'm by no stretch of the imagination a Kevin Smith fan, but even I thought he would be able to do a light-hearted Masters of the Universe cartoon. I mean, you have one job, Kevin. How hard can it be?
Mm-hmm. Craig, I've only got one thing to say to you about that. You bumbling buffoon!
You bumbling buffoon, Smith! You had one fucking job!
I've watched a lot of Kevin Smith talking about it, though, because I like him as a podcaster, as I said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's alright as a podcaster, actually. He's alright as an interviewer.
I don't know how much of it is throwing other people under the bus, but he has stated, like, on more than one occasion, that his
Dharma is the road.
that his brief, essentially, from Mattel Television was, make He-Man, but make it serious.
Really?
Yeah. So basically that was what he got told to do.
See, I blame Snyder for this. Mm-hmm. Snyder and Christopher Nolan.
Yeah.
This is what you have wrought.
I'd like a more believable He-Man, please. Sorry, what?
Yeah, that's definitely what I always wanted about a cartoon about a big guy in furry pants fighting a guy with a fucking skull for a face. Yeah. That's what
Are
we need.
they his pants, though? Are they his pants?
Yeah, or does he just need to shave down? He needs to manscape. He manscape.
TLDR. She-Ra. Check it out, guys.
Fingers well and truly on the pulse here.
Anything else you've watched? I know the answer is yes.
The answer is yes, because you told me that there was a TV show that I would enjoy, and I was like, I guess I'll check it out.
Sure did.
And you were correct, sir.
Is it a brand new show?
It is.
It's a tasty brand new show.
You want to run with this, Craig? Because you've seen all of it. I've only seen the first 4 episodes so far.
I have, so I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to give you any spoilers.
Yeah, I've not seen any of it yet, so...
Brand new cherry flavour on Netflix is an utterly insane 8-part limited series, which is sort of equal parts gross-out horror, sardonic comedy, a smidgen of Lynchian weirdness, a major dollop of Cronenbergian weirdness, all set in the early 90s about a young female filmmaker who initially seeks revenge against a Hollywood producer who steals her project out from under her, basically. That is how it starts. Where it goes from there is a whole other story.
I've just realised you literally can't really say any more without spoiling.
No, you can't, yeah. But that's what happens in the first episode, more or less.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's... This show is fucking nuts, man.
It is. I mean, I think I shocked you by saying this, Craig, but it is genuinely maybe one of the best things I've seen in years. Like,
you did say that.
I love it.
I don't disagree that it's great, but I knew you would be all over it. You were who I was thinking of, like the first few episodes. Like, James is gonna fucking love this.
It's like it was custom fucking written for me, and I can't get enough of it. I've literally had to slow down on watching it because otherwise I would just have, the whole thing would have gone in one night.
Yeah. I should say for the interest of Lynch fans, since we're in a Twin Peaks podcast, there's a lot in here that I think Lynch fans will dig. There are very conscious and deliberate Lynchian references all over the place.
Right down to the font of the titles and stuff.
Yes, yeah. Which takes place on a lit highway at night, with literally the Lost Highway. It's literally just like the Lost Highway opening credits, with the same colour, the same font, everything. And even the end credits of every episode is like that classic Lynch font that he uses in Wild at Heart, Fire Walk With Me, Twin Peaks Return for the end credits. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. I was going to point out to you, and I'm sure you spotted it as well right away, but the scene, we should mention the cast. Rosa Salazar is in the lead role. She's incredible.
She's amazing.
She is really great. I was not familiar with her really at all before this, other than as a name, but holy shit, I think she's incredible now. She does so much in this show that is just unbelievable. It also stars the great Catherine Keener.
Yep.
And you'll have noticed, James, when Catherine Keener's first scene, when she first appears, it's not spoiling anything to say that it happens at a party. Mm-hmm. But big mystery man / cowboy from Mulholland Drive vibes.
That was the most David Lynch thing I've ever seen that David Lynch didn't direct.
There's even a deliberate nod in the dialogue where the line where the cowboy says, "Can you try that for me?" It's like, okay, and Justin Theroux says, "Okay, I'm thinking." And the cowboy says, "No, you're not thinking. You're too busy being a smart aleck." There's a line of dialogue that's very, very similar, and that's it's like, all right, sure, yeah. I see what you're doing.
And there's also a line of dialogue in that scene that hugely echoes the "Call me, I'm at your house. I'm there right now" from Lost Highway. Is so similar to that with the kitten.
So many kittens, so many kittens.
The kitten's adorable.
Yeah, for people who like kittens, you will either love or hate this show.
But yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about this. It's really great to see Catherine Keener back, although she's apparently not been away. I looked at her IMDb and she's been working steadily, but I've not seen her in anything for a long time. And
same, I've not seen her in anything for ages, but as you and I discussed, she used to be a big 90s indie movie darling. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's nice to see her back in something that I'm properly engaged with. So you say you're halfway through it?
Yes.
Cool. Well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to let that run its course. But yeah, it's like equal parts Stephen King, George Romero, David Lynch, David Cronenberg, with an added bit of Latin American mysticism as well, which, you know me, James, I was like, oh, this is cool. There's a great gag that involves a couch, and that's all I'm going to say. But yeah, I came away from watching the whole thing. All I'll say is I did find the last couple of episodes, I don't want to say disappointment. It's not really a disappointment, but it wasn't quite what I wanted. But I still come away from it going, no, that was a good show. I'm very happy I watched it. It will likely end up in my end of year list.
Excellent. I'm worried that our end of year lists are just going to be the same with slight variations.
So we might save time if it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the end of year preview episode.
Yeah. Any other TV been catching your guys' eyes?
I can't remember was it the last episode or the episode before I was talking about slasher, but I decided I was just going to because I've watched the third season recently, which it took me ages to see. I thought I'll go back and watch the first two seasons, and since Alan came round I was like, you fancy watching this? And so we started watching the first season last night. I know what to expect because I've seen it before, and it's funny, I was saying to Alan, actually looking back on this first season, it's not quite as brutal as the third season is.
Which is, I'm quite looking forward to season 3 now.
Yeah, but it's a show that, and I commented on it last night when we were watching it, the acting style in this show is fucking wild, because it is so heightened. It's like daytime TV soap opera style of acting a lot of the time.
Amazing.
Apart from the first villain, like the this isn't really spoiling anything, but introduced a character who is the original killer and who is now in prison. The guy playing that role is oddly enough the most subtle actor in the whole thing, and everybody else is like acting in a daytime TV soap, whereas he's taking it quite seriously. But yeah, it involves some absolutely absurd plot twists. For a town that's supposedly this small, there's a hell of a lot going on, and it's a delight.
Yep.
Again, fans of David Lynch, Twin Peaks, there's stuff in there that I think you'll enjoy. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not up there. There's no mad surrealism. There's no doesn't have the artfulness of David Lynch, but it does have a kind of similar sort of sardonic feel and this like the same sort of humour mixed in with horror. Those Canadians know how to do good telly sometimes.
Hey,
Great use of a cinder block, possibly the best use of a cinder block in any TV show I've ever seen.
Yes. It's the foundation of all good horror stories.
I think on that comedy note, I think that wraps up for another episode of fSobrieTV.
Doodle pip.
Doodle pip.
Doodle pip. Good ep.
Good ep.
Good ep. Those guys know their TV.
Now back to our regularly scheduled TV shenanigans.
Yes, quite. All right, so all that done and dusted. Let's get to the business of talking Twin Peaks, specifically The Return, even more specifically Part 7.
There's a body, all right.
Let's return to the Twin Peaks The Return.
Le jour où je l'ai rencontrée dans une de ces soirées, j'ai même pas pu la regarder tellement ses yeux me brûlaient. Alors je lui ai pris la main.
Alright, chaps, before we get into details here, I just want to give a quick shout out, first of all, to John Bernardi over at 25 Years Later, who I know has been listening to our podcast coverage of Twin Peaks. John, if you're listening, thank you, we appreciate it. And he's been kind enough to comment and listen along. I wanted to raise something. I just want to say that sometimes I think there is maybe a cultural thing where, here's the thing.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
We take the piss out of David Lynch an awful lot on this podcast.
Really?
And I realised that after John Bernardi commented. And he was saying it in a nice way. He was, there was nothing thorny about it or anything. But it did just make me think. He sort of misinterpreted something we said as kind of accusing David Lynch of a thing, which I no longer remember what it was. But suggesting David Lynch had said
Was it
something.
how he was a rubbish dad?
No, it actually wasn't that. It was actually something.
It makes that
something
now.
else. Yeah. But yeah, to be clear. See, in Scotland, this is just how we do stuff. We show our affection by ripping the piss. And it's how we deal with each other as friends as well. We just take mercilessly ripping the piss out of each other. That means take the mickey, sorry, in case that's not clear.
There's a film out just now called Lost Girls in Love Hotels, and it's an American lady in Tokyo, and she has a Scottish friend, and one scene they're in a pub getting pished, and he explains to her how the word cunt is just like we say it.
Right, yes.
Regarding like your dad or the guy that you hate the most or your best friend. Or...
Yeah, and it's literally an almost meaningless word in Scots vernacular.
that should give someone an insight into how we speak about everything.
I think in the UK generally we do have a sense of humour where we do just tend to really take the piss out of each other, and we tend to take the piss out of the stuff that we enjoy. And I think in Scotland it's definitely 10 times the case. So I just want to clarify for North American listeners or any listeners outside the UK, when it sounds like we're taking the piss out of David Lynch, which we will do going forward, I know we will, it's not meant with any malice. It is 100% meant with affection. So, yeah, John, thank you. We love you. We're glad you're along with us, and we really appreciate you shouting us out, so thank you. The other thing I just want to quickly say, while we're on this subject, is the other thing I would just add is that I do sometimes think this applies to none of the podcasts I've ever mentioned on the podcast, but there are other Twin Peaks and David Lynch podcasts out there who I sometimes feel are a bit guilty of being a bit sycophantic about David Lynch. And to quote the late Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther, we don't do that here. And as much as taking the piss out of David Lynch is just a natural cultural phenomenon for us, I do think it is one of those things that's in my mind that we definitely want to avoid being a bit too up David Lynch's arse, as we would say in this part of the world. So if that's something that you just find a bit unusual to listen to, then please just take our word for it that we don't bear David Lynch any malice.
I'm afraid we reserve being up people's arses for Sam Esmail on our Mr. Robot episodes.
And both the bands Nervosa and Crypta.
Yep, so we're up plenty of arses.
That's true, yeah. It's just, let's face it, David Lynch is a larger-than-life character. There's plenty there to take the piss out of while still appreciating him as an artist. All right, all that addendum out of the way.
We start with a red Rancho Rosa logo.
Oh yes, I forgot that you're keeping track of the colours. How are we doing there?
Well, I forgot to do it the last episode, so I've done it twice. So right now, so far we've had black and white, and now we've had red. So make of that what you will. We cut to your friend and mine, Mr. Jerry Horn.
Every man, Jerry Horn.
Still wearing mother's hat.
Yep, and a shirt not necessarily conducive to hiking.
And it becomes clear quite quickly that he doesn't know why he's there.
He appears to be in distress, definitely.
I actually love the way this is staged with Ben on the phone. I think Richard Bamer's, well, both of their performances are great, but I absolutely love Richard Bamer's every utterance of, what?
Yeah.
It is very much like a hark back to old school Ben Horn in those moments. Like that sense of just frustration and that the rest of the world being a bit beneath him. That's exactly where he is with Jerry in this moment. It's funny this because it's demonstrably funny for many reasons. But we sort of touched on this a few episodes ago. But just the difference in classic Jerry and this this new Jerry,
Stoner Jerry.
It's a journey that makes all kinds of sense. But yeah, it is. It is funny to see David Patrick Kelly just giving this entirely different kind of performance as the same character.
Like you say, it gives the impression of that 25 years have passed since we last saw him. From slimy, disbarred lawyer to weird businessman stoner is a trajectory for sure.
It sure is a journey. Now, I know this scene is largely in here for laughs, and Jerry's journey from here on is largely comic relief. However, is the fact that Jerry is so high, does that have any other relevance to what's going on in the story? Because here's why I ask. We know he's probably lost is somewhere in Ghostwood.
Yeah.
We know that Ghostwood is a source of, or at least a site at various points of what you might call the overlapping of worlds and whatnot. There's a certain mystical quality in those woods. Is it possible that Jerry has imbibed something from the woods itself? Because here's why I ask. We know that Jerry these days is he's got his now legal weed business. I don't know of any variety of weed that gets you stoned to this extent for as long as Jerry does in this story. So is it possible that he perhaps, while he was already high, plucked a couple of mushrooms? And maybe that's why, maybe these mushrooms are somehow imbued with some sort of Black Lodge power or White Lodge power.
Or just because of the location itself, like how fucked up he is, he's maybe pierced the veil kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, I guess that works too, yeah.
Are you saying, Craig, that it sounds like he's been snacking on some of the local mushrooms?
Ah, you got it. That's where I was going to go. I was going for the classic Albert.
Yes.
But yeah, and that's. I think that's always been part of my headcanon. Now, obviously, when we first watched this, we had no idea where this part of the story was going. In the end, it sort of literally goes nowhere, apart from Montana, where Jerry ends up naked. But I think at the time, I do remember thinking to myself, "Oh, I wonder if he's like under the influence of some sort of large energy, not to be confused with small
Large.
small energy." So yeah,
Yes,
I think it's a fun thing to contemplate.
Yeah, in his own way, he experiences a sort of abduction, like similarly that what happened to Margaret Lanterman and what happened to Major Briggs.
Yeah, and Carl Rod, if you believe Mark Frost's book.
Only we're seeing it happen and he's remembering it as it happens.
Yeah.
So maybe the log lady, maybe Carl, maybe Major Briggs, maybe they all just get real fucking high in the woods. But Jerry spent so long building up a resistance that, you know, he's also conscious during the whole thing.
Ah, I like that. That's a nice theory. Yeah. Also, I think probably to go back to taking the piss out of David Lynch just for a second, he's probably practiced enough transcendental meditation, and therefore, you know, he can reach all levels of consciousness. The rest of us plebs are not privy to.
Yogic flying!
Yoga flame!
My favourite line in this exchange with him and Ben is when Jerry says, "I don't know where I am. Somebody stole my car." Ben says, "What? Somebody stole your car?" To which Jerry replies, "You said the same thing."
It's kind of a callback to Coop, though, like with the whole repeating something that somebody says. Like,
yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, and that sort of echolalia without, yeah.
I knew there was a name for it.
With quote-unquote Dougie Cooper, I think originally watching The Return, we sort of assumed for a long time that Dougie Cooper was just doing the echolalia because it was like he was hearing words for the first time. Whereas now, I think, knowing what we know specifically about the deleted scenes from The Return that we talked about a couple of episodes ago, that Cooper is in fact a little bit more present under the surface. It feels more like the Dougie Cooper is actually sort of searching for meaning in everything around him in a way which sort of transcends just, you know, repeating the words for the sake of repeating the words.
Well, you'll see it later on in this episode as well, where like something happens and he just like, as the old saying goes, the training just kicks in and
yes,
OG Coop like takes over for a second.
And it's like, to a certain extent, he's following the giant's clues again, where he hears something and he's like, that's important, you know. After all, a path is formed by laying one stone at a time.
Yes, good callback.
But Jerry's having none of that right now. Do you know what, though? The scene with Jerry and Ben here just talking to each other, the energy it reminds me of. Do you know what it reminds us of? It reminds us
of Jenny and Jenny down by the river.
Yeah, it reminds us of the scene where he says, "You know what this reminds us of?"
Yes, yeah. Jenny and Jenny down by the river.
Oh, good.
Oh my God.
This is something about the energy of those two actors, of Richard Bamer and David Patrick Kelly.
Yeah.
Always brings me back to that one scene.
And that is the first scene we ever see them together. So yeah, it is a character-defining moment. All right, so then we segue to the classic location of the Twin Peaks Sheriff's Department. Now, I will say here, before we dive deep in on this scene, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but I remember after this episode aired, we got so much of Twin Peaks, the town, in this episode, and we also got so much plot development. This episode, largely because of the scenes like the one we're about to discuss, really left me with the sense that this episode was a lot like what I expected Twin Peaks The Return was going to be like. And in a way, that turned out to be both a gift and a curse, because for the ensuing episodes afterwards, I was like, oh no, it's still not that. Yeah. It was just that for that one episode. I see how it is. But yeah, this was totally like, okay, so they're gonna track down Cooper, they're gonna work all this out, and the plot's gonna go somewhere else. And it's like, no, it's gonna take episodes and episodes before any of that happens. So yeah, wasn't quite what I expected. But you know, more fool me, because I know David Lynch's filmmaking style. I should have expected that this would take a long time to go anywhere not so fast.
Yeah, it's kind of like a here's what you could have won moment.
Right. Yeah.
It's a speedboat.
Why is it always a speedboat?
It's a chocolate bunny.
I love the energy and everything about this scene of Hawk and Sheriff Truman going over the pages and the callbacks to Fire Walk With Me is just, oh, so good.
Watching this for the first time was so exciting. And I remember, James, you and me were both buzzing after this episode and specifically discussing this scene.
Yeah, because like you say, it was like everything we thought the return was going to be. It was like it had all crystallized down to this moment, and it was like, yes, this is Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and I think we said in our last podcast that you and I both called what the pages were and what they would say. And so to hear Frank read it aloud, I remember just getting total chills and going, oh, yes, they figured out that the good Cooper is in the lodge. This is great. So, yeah, a lot to go through here. Yeah, the energy between Hawk and Frank, this whole thing, this whole atmosphere, really, really great. I love how quietly authoritative Michael Horse is as Hawk in this scene. This might be my favourite Hawk scene in the whole of the season. And it's entirely unflashy, but it's Hawk absolutely within himself as Hawk, doing the police work, telling Frank what's what, and I really dig it. Part of me really wishes we got a bit more of that, but I'm so glad this stuff is here.
There is a moment of dialogue here, though, and it's Hawk that says it, which is ultimate David Lynch brush stuff under the carpet that he didn't really care about.
Yeah, I know he does.
Do you know the line I mean specifically?
A girl who went into that place.
Yes.
Annie Blackburn of Who's Annie cliffhanger fame is literally described as a girl who went into that place. And I hope you enjoyed that reference, Twin Peaks fans, because that is the first and last you will hear about Annie in this entire season, which to this day, I have to say, still seems really weird to me. And I totally accept that David Lynch just had other ideas of where he wanted to take the story, but it's very hard not to feel that being the only mention of Annie, given how much attention she was given, not just towards the end of the second season, but also the fact that Lynch himself deliberately included her in Fire Walk With Me. He deliberately incorporated Annie into his own Twin Peaks mythos. It is weird to see him now just, we'll throw this in, explain that away, and that's your Annie. Hope you enjoyed it. I do find it a wee bit strange.
Hawk doesn't even say, oh yeah, it's Norma's little sister. She went into that place.
Right, exactly. There's no mention of who she is at all. It's really, really odd.
Pay no attention to that Annie behind the red curtain.
Here's where, here's our first hashtag meta thing that we're keeping track of. Is it possible that in Agent Cooper's, let's say this is an Agent Cooper Mulholland Drive, as we've theorised, that this is all of the return is basically a product of Agent Cooper's subconscious. Let's say that for a moment. Is it possible that we're not dealing with Annie because Cooper doesn't want to deal with Annie?
It is entirely possible. He's the one brushing it under the carpet because he fucked up so bad.
Yeah.
For the second time.
For the second time, right? First with Caroline, and then with Annie. Yeah. And I think it's quite telling that, knowing that what we know of Cooper, that he does have a bit of a hero complex, it does therefore make sense. What if I can save another woman and then I could pretend I've done good, and those other ones won't matter. So even though he might have, loved those other two women, there is this part of him that's like, but I can make it better by doing one great thing. And arguably, he does one incredibly great thing by defying the loss of time and space towards the end of this season by quote-unquote saving Laura, or at least, preventing her from being murdered in the way she originally was. I do feel that maybe tracks. That is, if you were 100% sold on this Agent Cooper's Mulholland Drive theory. If this is your first episode listening, then again, I don't know why this would be your first one, but if it is, whatever, horses for courses, then this is something
White
we've touched on.
For courses.
Right, exactly.
For courses.
Hey, this is something we're keeping track of as a possible meta interpretation of the return. That if it is all in Cooper's head. We're not necessarily saying we're married to that interpretation, just that it is a possible interpretation.
I think we're at least engaged.
We're definitely engaged. So we also get mention here of other legacy characters, because when Hawk is sort of laying everything out, you get the mention of Ronette, you get the mention of Jacques Renault. So these characters are all mentioned in the correct context, but Annie is not. Annie is just a girl who went into that place. It's really weird.
Yeah. It's like, it seems like a total David Lynch rewrite. This is retcon 101.
Yeah.
And none of us at the time, I guess, really overly questioned it. Like, I'm sure we were like, yeah, but, you know, the fact that Annie was mentioned is maybe enough at the time, and it's only kind of, really analysing it, and in retrospect, you're like, kind of done Annie dirty.
They did a wee bit, and I know that a lot of the fan base feel that way and are quite upset about it still, and I get it. I mean, it doesn't ruin anything for me. I still love the return. Again, as I've said probably repeatedly now, the return as it is one of those things I never knew I wanted, but it turned out to be everything I needed. But there is nonetheless parts of it where I'm like, but what if they'd done something else with it? I would have found that really satisfying. I think at the time when I first saw this episode, I was maybe subconsciously thinking that they would come back to Annie in some fashion, even if it was just, you know, another mention of who she was. But they do not.
No, I still had it in my head that they'd kept Heather Graham out of the revealed cast list to hide the fact that she was going to be in it. And
I think a lot of people were theorising that at the time.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Another fun thing in the dialogue here that I really enjoy, and it always makes me laugh, is when Frank is receiving all this information, and he pauses and he says, yeah, I remember this. And it's like, how many murders of homecoming queens do you get in this town? Because I would assume you would remember it, Frank, first of all. But then he goes on to say, no, and he's trying to parse the information from the dream where Annie is essentially talking about future Cooper. And he's trying to parse all that, and he says, so let me get this straight. Laura never met Cooper. He arrived after she died. And as part of me, every time I see that, I'm like, yes, Frank, that's how murder investigations work. They don't tend to arrive before the victim has died.
Well seen, it was nepotism that got you your sheriff job. Yeah. But I also like that, on the other hand, you know, it's 25 years is a long time to remember stuff. Especially, I mean, to be fair, large events happening in your hometown, but still, you know, you could go, oh yeah, that happened. Shit, I've forgotten all about that. You know.
I mean, who knows what's going on nowadays? I mean, just the other day, little Danny Craig OD'd at the school. Oh, little Danny Craig. Yes, listeners in North America, I said Danny Craig, not Danny Craig.
And then little unnamed boy became a
pancake.
You know. Yeah, that is another weird one. Or maybe it isn't weird. Maybe it is a deliberate signal to us to think about things in a certain way, because the entire ethos of the original Twin Peaks, if you like, was really was a treatise in grief. It's particularly that first season. It really was all about the town's grief in the wake of Laura's death. And, you know, Laura was very much the absent centre. We got to know everything about Laura. We started learning things about her that the other townspeople didn't know. And it was like a revelation of the town to itself, you know. Nothing like that occurs for this little boy. In fact, this little boy is only ever referred to as that little boy. We never even learn the kid's name.
To be fair, I don't want to sound cold-hearted here or anything.
Oh, here we go.
But, I mean, the little boy didn't accomplish anything, did he? Whereas Laura Palmer was fucking...
Meals on Wheels, homecoming queen,
prom queen, straight-A student.
She was at the coke-fueled centre of that town. So, of course, everyone was going to miss her. But also, again, it adds to the idea that in the ensuing 25 years, tragedy has become more commonplace in Twin Peaks to the point where now it's just like, something bad's happened again.
Yeah, there's also the recurring theme, and I will come back to this later as well, because there's another scene that denotes this quite specifically. But all the way through the season is this idea that Twin Peaks is sicker than it was, that somehow it's gotten ill. And this is exemplified, first of all, by the actual real sickness of certain characters, such as Harry, for example, whose absence we will discuss in just a second. Also, later, towards the end of the episode, Beverly's husband, also very, very sick. We also know the log lady is in a similar situation. So there is this idea that we're being presented with a vision of Twin Peaks that is kind of ailing, that is kind of stumbling towards the end of itself, you know. So yeah, in that sense, it sort of makes sense, along with some of the things the log lady says in later episodes about the light dying and whatnot. Yeah, this is very much a conscious part of it. So I suppose what I'm getting at is, with regards to the wee boy, there was a lot of people when this first aired, and I still even see some people say things like this online, that they're always very distressed and disturbed with the thing about the wee boy because it's never resolved. and we never really know who the kid is, and it seems to be treated very coldly and remotely, and I kind of think that's entirely the point. We're supposed to point that out and go, this seems not very Twin Peaks-esque. There's no warmth here. That's supposed to be apparent to us.
It's really something that kind of gives you an idea of how Richard is like a bad guy. He's made some big mistakes. He's in with the wrong crowd and whatnot, and then it gives you the whole plot point about the teacher as well in it. So there is kind of something to the story about it, but you never really go back to the mother or even...
the mother's
Harry
nameless
Truman.
as well, and we never see the mother again either. And it's like, that would never have happened in the original Twin Peaks,
Yeah, no one jumps in a coffin and goes up and down and then gets laughed at in the Double R Diner later on.
Yeah, Dwayne and Dougie Milford don't turn up at a wake for the wee boy and start arguing. I'm going to put his head in the trash where it belongs.
The realisation here that Hawk has, in the totally almost casual matter of fact way, he says it when he's reading. He's like, the good Coop is trapped in the lodge, and he's like, so the one that came out
was not the good Cooper.
Yeah, it's so chilling because it's Hawk's not labouring under the misapprehension here that the lodge is a thing that could exist or that is a metaphor. He's like, okay, she had this dream, the bad Coop came out.
Yeah. Hawk immediately takes it all at face value and just instantly believes that that's the case, and also, therefore, I like the reference really there that Hawk knows and accepts that time means nothing where the lodge is concerned. He's entirely unsurprised that there would be a message relating to the lodge that is received by somebody before the event has even happened. That makes perfect sense to Hawk. And I really dig that detail.
And the other thing about it is that Frank's like, okay.
Yeah, Frank's entirely accepting. It's like, all right, well, Hawk, if you say so, I guess I believe it.
And he says he's going to tell Harry about it. Now, here's the thing. We talked about this last episode, about how some fans felt that treating Harry Truman as being sick by him not being in the show was a bit disrespectful to the character or was unnecessary. And I was thinking about that because I never thought that myself, but I was thinking about it more. And more specifically in this episode, it struck me that of course they had to make Harry sick to a point where he couldn't be involved if he wasn't there, because if Harry Truman found out what was going on, Harry Truman would have been there. Yeah. So they had to make it impossible for him to be there. When Frank decides not to tell him what's going on, is just really heartbreaking.
It really is.
Because he knows that Harry would have been...
he'd be straight out of bed, and stumbling in there. Yeah, that's a good point, and it does add an extra layer of pathos to that whole thing. It's funny because that's an element I don't think I appreciated properly the first time around, because I think at the time I had that same level of frustration where I was like, oh, does this mean Harry is going to turn up? And then, of course, he doesn't. And that sort of overrode at the time any other considerations I might have had. But certainly in rewatches, that is something that's on my mind. It's like, oh no, Frank, you did the right thing. Because, Harry would have been stumbling in there on crutches, on drips. And in another Lynch project that could have been done for a comedy, but I don't think it would have been appropriate in the return.
I think it maintains a level of respect for the character, and that's the only thing that could have stopped him from being there for the whole situation.
While we're on this subject, just a quick segue. Everybody has theorised about this. Every Twin Peaks podcast I've listened to all have various theories about this. Now, we don't have a concrete answer to this question. We're never going to, but it's one worth pondering. How much of Frank Truman's character was rewritten from what was originally written as Harry? Because we know that this was originally written as Harry Truman. So all of this stuff, obviously, with Frank phoning Harry, that wasn't part of the original script. So I'm just specifically in relation to the Hawk and the sheriff together going over those pages, I'm just intrigued to think how that scene would have played out between Harry and Hawk. Because Harry doesn't need to explain to him, although I see this with the best will in the world, right? But I listened to some of the Damn Fine TV podcasts recently. They do a fair bit of taking the piss out of Harry a wee bit, and that he does seem a bit dense sometimes. And they do make jokes occasionally, like, well, like what I've just said there. Well, Harry doesn't need that explained. They sometimes say things like that, then pause and go, well, actually, maybe. And there are moments in the original series where Harry does seem a wee bit slow, and whether or not that was deliberate characterization or whether it was just holes in the writing here and there. I don't know.
Might want to try learning to walk without dragging your knuckles on the ground.
So maybe the scene played out like this. Hawk, instead of sitting at the desk, was up at the chalkboard and he was drawing Harry a picture. Going, you remember Harry? You remember the Glastonbury Grove? Glastonbury Grove. No, not Glastonbury, not the burial place of King Arthur. The other one.
Remember that girl who went there once? Or I wonder if, like, a lot of it does explain Frank's just, like, complete acceptance of everything that Hawk's saying, because obviously in the original script, Harry would have been so on board with it that he'd have been like, oh yeah. But I feel like Harry would have been more proactive in attempting to find out more about it.
Right, that's a good point. I feel like it would be as well. Which does, and that, I guess that's where I'm intrigued as to what was tweaked and what was changed with regards to this character. Because I don't need to go back into how much I love Robert Forster. He's amazing, and I think this character is fine, but there is a part of me that's like, maybe there should have been somebody a bit more proactive in there. But if there was, then the storyline essentially would have been different.
And we would have got less backstory as well. I think him asking questions about what happened helps the audience fill in the blanks of what happened in the last 25 years.
That's true, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like his whole little weird Skype desk convo and stuff wouldn't have happened.
So good.
His Batman desk, as I've called it in my notes.
But, as you say, great performance from Robert Forster anyway, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
All right, so Frank tells Harry that it's nothing urgent, and he has that line where he says, do me a favour, Harry, and beat this thing. We do not have it confirmed in the show at all, but Mark Frost does confirm in the final dossier that Harry has cancer. But I think that's kind of where our minds were all going anyway, because I think we're all kind of thinking, what else could it be?
It's definitely implied.
To hear Frank deliver that line is really devastating. And I think at this point, because we've seen so much bleakness already in this version of Twin Peaks, that to hear Frank say, beat this thing, it really slugs it to you that, no, there's a good chance he won't beat this thing, because that's the world we're in now. It's really kind of devastating. It doesn't matter how many times I see this now, and also because obviously Harry's fate is left, unclear at the end of the series. We never really know, and so it is a wee bit upsetting.
We can only theorise or guess how we can have headcanon. I like to think he beat it.
Yeah. And one of the realities that Cooper creates. Alright, so let's talk about this real enigma for me, that is the scene between Deputy Andy Brennan
and Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins.
Yes. The character described in the credits only as Farmer. I'm just going to straight out ask, what is going on here?
I don't know, but I loved it.
We know that's the truck that Richard Horne was driving that run over the kid. That appears to belong to this farmer. That appears to be what Andy is inquiring about. Yep. But I have questions. First of all, why is Andy being so kind of lackadaisical about this? Why is he not taking this guy in for questioning?
I had the opposite reaction there. I thought Andy has now become an actual cop rather than comedy relief, and he was clued into the whole situation that this guy was terrified about him being there at that particular time, and so arranged to meet him later. He's still a decent human being, so
I can see that interpretation, but here's the problem with it though. It sort of doesn't mean anything if he doesn't then also say, oh, listen, Frank, we better stake out this farmer, because I think somebody shady might be about to arrive. I think this guy might be in trouble. Unless that does happen and we just don't see it, because let's be real, there seems to be a lot that we are not privy to in the return in the way that we were in the original series. So who knows, maybe off screen that does happen. But what troubles me about this is that this and the later scene with Andy waiting for the farmer on the logging road and he doesn't appear, this episode is the first and last we ever hear of this. This farmer is never mentioned again. We only get the very ominous looking ajar door at the farmer's place with the ominous hum. And that's it. It's never mentioned again. And so this part of my brain is is Andy keeping this a secret from the rest of the sheriff's department? And if so, why? What's going on?
Also, he's ascertained that the truck is the murder weapon.
You're right, yes. Literally
and
the
it's
murder
not
weapon.
impounded, they just leave it there.
I just took it as being one of those things where things are happening in the background that aren't integral to like the kind of main story, and so you just don't hear about them. The same way you don't see anybody go to the toilet and things like that. It's just...
Well, this is slightly different from people going to the toilet, though.
Yeah, no, I know. But
for example, right, later in the season, we get to learn that when Chad gets caught and gets thrown in the cell, we learn that they've been watching Chad for a while. That's not mentioned at all in any of the earlier episodes, which is fine. We don't necessarily need to see it. And we know Chad's enough of a douchebag that probably he's not been the best at covering his tracks. So we can join the dots there. And look, there's a lot about Twin Peaks: The Return that's very vague. That's just something we're just going to have to accept. The thing about these scenes, though, with Andy, is that Lynch goes out of his way to show us these very specific scenes with no other context anywhere. And I'm just like, Whereas with any other scenes that you can say don't have context, they literally don't have any context to any of the other characters. Whereas Andy has all sorts of context to the sheriff's department. And I'm just like, why is this not mentioned again? That's just a bit odd. If you're not going to show us any of the other stuff to do with this investigation, then why show us any of it? Because this doesn't tell us anything. Do you know what I mean?
Is the farmer Billy?
Okay, now this is the other part. This is the other can of worms I was going to nudge with my stick here. There has been for ages this theory online that the farmer is Billy. And I think the reason that has arisen is because of what Charlie says to Audrey about Chuck having stolen Billy's truck. And so that has led some people to speculate that this farmer is Billy. Now, if it is Billy, where does that lead us? Is it possible... I tell you what, let's take this in parts, right? Let's take the first part. What is our speculation about what the farmer is involved in and why is he so scared? Who's he scared of? Because my first thoughts go to Red.
I assume he's scared of Richard Horn.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Richard took his truck, Richard killed someone, Richard dropped the truck back, and Richard's a fucking mental case. And he probably said, don't tell anyone I had your truck.
Fair enough. See, I was thinking Red, because I was thinking maybe Red organised for Richard to have this guy's truck, and Red is much scarier than Richard. But yeah, no, you mean Richard is scary enough, I guess. I'm not going to dispute that. So yeah, I guess that works.
Because I assume that what happens is he's like, I don't want local nutcase Richard Horn finding out that I've dobbed him into the coppers.
Fair enough.
Later. And then Richard Horn's like, guess what? You're going to dob me into the coppers, so I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
You know how he goes through those screen doors like a madman?
This is true.
There's no very fragile screen door in the United States can hold back Richard Horn.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is this one seems different because we see what happens to Miriam. We literally see Richard Horn go about his business. But if that's also what happens here, then I don't see any reason for us not to see it if we also see what happens to Miriam.
That's possible. I just assumed it was David Lynch doing his, you can see something once, that's enough.
Right,
thing.
Yeah. No, it probably is. And I do, listen, don't get me wrong, I actually love the fact that it is opaque. I love the fact that we're left to wonder about it. It's a difficult hole for me to square.
See, where I was going, I know we've kind of debunked it kind of because there's no noise, but I just assumed it was one of the dirty miner dudes that murdered them for whatever reason. I don't know, but
to be honest, I don't think the noise is even in the scene. I think it's like just, it's not diegetic. I think it's it's just part of the score. I don't think it's like part of the scene. Although, who knows?
The other thing that automatically made me think this was Billy is because Billy gets killed, or we assume Billy's dead, and then the scene at the end where the guy's like, has anybody seen Billy?
Right.
Runs down the street.
Yeah.
Although all this time, this all sort of nudges up against my favourite theory is that the Billy that Audrey's talking about is the actor Billy Zane.
Right, a lot of people have made that theory as well, that this is a meta moment and that she's actually breaking the fourth wall and talking about Billy Zane. I don't buy it, but I think it's a fun idea.
Yeah, to look at it at face value, I would just assume that the farmer, Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins, is afraid of Richard Horn.
Yeah, I mean, it entirely suffices as an explanation. What still doesn't suffice for me, though, is Andy's motives. Yeah. Is this just bad police work by Andy? Is that all it is?
I think so. Andy, all his time, is still just kind of a shitty cop. He's like, I'll meet you up a logging road so that we can say the words Sparkwood and 21 in the return and make everyone go, ooh,
I remember
Sparkwood and 21.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, he's not here? Oh, well, I guess case closed. Time to go home and play trumpet in bed with Lucy.
Do some sketchings.
Of course, Andy's got a drawing tablet now because it's, you know...
You're right, yeah. Get with the times, bro. Alright, well, let's put a pin in that for now. The ongoing mystery of Andy's motive / Shoddy's police work in relation to quote-unquote Billy.
But speaking of legacy characters, as we were...
Yes, here's one of the most regal.
I mean, I've heard of phoning in a performance, but this is ridiculous.
I heard you say that in Will Arnett's voice.
Come on!
Holy shit.
The production design of this screen coming out the desk is tremendous. The fact that it's
So
such
good.
a high-tech thing that's activated by, like, a wooden stick.
This is such a Lynch thing. I feel like David Lynch probably built this desk himself.
It's one of the few times, though, that I've seen a computer being used on the TV or whatever, and it's just like, yep, Skype, there you go. Like, most of the time it's like, we'll sit watching things with you, Craig, and you're like,
is that how computers work? Yeah, consider all the fuckery we saw with Doppelcooper downloading the fucking schematics for the Yankton prison back in part 2.
Hacker voice, I'm in.
Right, yes.
Hollywood hacker bullshit. I've been in this game 27 years. Not once have I ever come across an animated singing virus.
And now we get this absolutely verity representation of Skype.
With them typing in his password in real time.
Yeah, only Lynch would labour over this much detail. It's like,
I love that detail, though, because it's like, there's no way Frank is a typer. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's definitely a two-finger typer. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's, like, it was... perfect. Chef's kiss.
I really love this conversation. First of all, I love the vibe that it's funny that we've never seen or met Frank Truman before this started, and yet we really do get the sense that these two guys go way back, which is quite a difficult thing to do when you're dealing with a legacy character. But Robert Forster and Warren Frost just are instantly batting it back and forth like they've got old-time chemistry. I really dig it.
That kind of Frank Truman Wolverine moment, wasn't it? Where he's met everybody.
It's so good to see Doc Hayward.
Yeah, and it's another press F moment because this is yet another Twin Peaks actor of the many who are now no longer with us. Yep. Warren Frost was another one, I believe, died before The Return was released. Is that right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he also, much like Miguel Ferrer, much like Catherine Coulson, was very much towards the end of his life as he was filming this, which is just mad to think about. So yeah, great dialogue in this scene. The way that the kind of hokey pleasantries are mixed up with some vital information, and the way it's doled out, I really just love the natural flow of this conversation. It's really beautiful stuff. The way Doc Hayward says, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can absolutely remember that morning where, you know, Cooper was in hospital. Yeah, it's all great stuff. And of course, this is where we get the really quite horrid detail that Doc Hayward confirms that he saw Cooper go into the ICU where Audrey Horne was, and he says, I just assumed he was going to go visit Audrey. And then he left and he looked back and he had that strange look on his face. Yeah. This does a great job of amping up the Creepsville. Mm-hmm. Which, considering how awful we've seen Doppelcooper be already, it really shouldn't be this effective, but it still is. But yeah, this set the internet alight, I seem to recall, with people saying, oh no, please don't let Doppelcooper have abused Audrey or violated Audrey in any way, and we were all hoping that would not be the case. But alas.
I always forget Warren Frost is Mark Frost's dad.
Indeed, yeah.
Oh, really?
Fucking nepotism, am I right?
But yeah, 91, he had a good innings, as they say.
Yeah.
And he left on a high. That dad joke was absolute fucking quality.
Yep.
What they were doing in my pajamas, I've no idea.
It's Frank's reaction to it as well. I just like absolutely loved it. He's just pure like he knows what's coming.
Like it's the funniest thing he's heard all year.
But yeah, like you say, that mention of Audrey and the callback to the bank situation and stuff is like, that was another moment where we were all like, oh,
yeah.
It's Twin Peaks. This is a continuation of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, no, it's the moments like this. It's like, oh no, this is real. It's really happening. We're really getting that continuation. It is nice. It's reassuring to have David Lynch give us these scenes where, because we all know David Lynch goes off on one, goes off on his own tangent, and so it's nice to have these moments where it's like, oh no, David Lynch acknowledges that this is canon. So that's reassuring.
Now, in order to portray Doppelkoop as just a real evil bastard, are there other things they could have done, or is it a bit problematic and tropey to have him just be this guy who just does a bunch of rapes? Is using his abuse of women as a trope a bit wonky?
It's not right, but is it? Obviously, I said to you before that I can't remember all the details of where it goes, but is Richard Audrey's son?
Yes, yeah.
Right, and it's obviously Coop's the dad in it, so like you can't have that any other way, really. Like, well, I mean, you could say that they had sex before that point or whatever, but
you could, but I think that would be cheating the audience because
that's what I mean. Like, it's kind of like this revelation. It serves like the kind of dual purpose of cluing you into that there's something that happened there. Mm-hmm. It's like obviously awful, and also later on you'll get the kind of revelation that's who the mother and father are, kind of thing. It shouldn't be a trope that's used at all anymore, really.
It's not the first time, let's be honest, that David Lynch has run into this particular avenue, this dicey avenue, where he opens himself up to this same kind of criticism. Certainly back in the day when Blue Velvet came out, there was a lot of discussion, and there still is to this day, especially in academic film critic circles, about whether or not David Lynch is misogynistic. You know, it's one of those things where somebody can be a very affable human being in everyday public life. That doesn't necessarily stop them from being a misogynist, but the question is their work suggestive of the possible fact that they are misogynistic or harbour misogynistic tendencies? For as much as I take the piss out of David Lynch on this podcast, I'm not convinced that he's misogynistic per se, but I do think he definitely is obsessed with the idea of violated women, because they turn up in every single one of his movies. And I think the reason why I'm not totally convinced, and I'll throw in the caveat that obviously I'm a heterosexual male talking about this, I shouldn't be the final voice on whether David Lynch is a misogynist or not, but I think for me, he always treats this subject with just enough, if not obvious respect, then enough interpretable respect. I mean, for example, the one I always think about is Mulholland Drive, which I actually think is a really quite sympathetic portrayal of a damaged woman. For me, there's nothing in that movie where the lead character is objectified as being a broken woman. We actually feel that she's someone who's in pain, and we sympathise with that pain, and then we get to a point where it's like, oh no, this pain has driven her to do something utterly terrible, and then our feelings sort of do a turnaround, and it's a very complex portrayal of different emotional states that drive someone to do a terrible thing, and we might have all kinds of judgments to make about that terrible thing, but none of those judgments are because the character has been objectified or has been made into, anything other than a fully developed character. It's just a weird one with Lynch because he's a different way of developing characters than the usual sort of way. Lynch doesn't do character development in the sense that most screenwriters do. He shows it to you in metaphors and symbolism, and that's why, depending on how you interpret that symbolism, you could easily come away thinking, oh, that man is an absolute misogynist, or if you're tuned into it a slightly different way, you might say, oh no, that's actually a very sensitive portrayal of someone who's been through trauma. And for me, I always come down on the latter way more than the former, because it just makes more sense to me.
I just wondered a lot about that at the time and on the rewatch, because at the time when it was broadcast, it was like right at the height of Game of Thrones popularity. Mm-hmm. Game of Thrones received so much shit, and I feel some of it rightly so, in that it used sexual abuse as a trope, as like it was like, here, rape as character development, huzzah. I
think where it's dicey where Audrey is concerned is that Audrey is there's a great case to be made that Audrey is very much sidelined in Twin Peaks: The Return. For as much as I would make the case that her being sidelined in the way that she is in itself actually a statement of extreme sympathy for that character, but nonetheless, she is still sidelined. And I think, it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. We're so used to receiving narratives in a certain way that Lynch just doesn't play by those rules. And so when you're receiving that sort of information in a very opaque way, it can seem as if the person telling you these things is being frivolous about it. And I think it really is down to just whether you take David Lynch's word or not, or whether you have enough faith in David Lynch that he's coming from a pure place. There's times that I definitely have problems with it. I mean, the thing with Audrey is a really complicated one. I still have complicated feelings about it. But, you know, if you were to watch any one of his works in isolation, I think some of them are more problematic than others. Like, I actually think Lost Highway is really quite a problematic one in this respect, because all the female presences in that movie are either dead or femme fatales. And it's like, you didn't do such a great job on this one. Right, aye, exactly. Yeah. But on the other hand, and this is where it gets complicated, that movie is specifically about a very hyper-masculine male attempting to escape his own responsibility for the terrible deed he has committed on this woman whom he has objectified. So it gets very complicated depending on how you think about these things as you interpret them.
I think so. I just thought it was one of these things that was always worth bringing up. And it goes back to what you said earlier in the episode. We're not going to be always up David Lynch's arse. We do need to call up things that we see as we see them.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that we're not enjoying the show.
Yep. You should and indeed have a responsibility to criticise the things you enjoy. That should just be a truism across, the way everybody consumes popular culture. You should be critical of things you like.
I mean, on the internet nowadays that they have, it is such a common thing to be, well, if you don't think something is the best thing you've ever seen in the world and it's perfect, then it's the worst thing in the world.
It's something you encounter on just about every online fandom. As soon as you insert any vaguely critical comment about anything, everybody thinks that you've somehow betrayed the cult. And that's where I really lose patience for this stuff. It's entirely healthy and indeed necessary to criticise stuff that you engage with in a positive way.
Unless it's a Zack Snyder film, in which case just tear it to shreds.
You heard it here first.
I don't think anybody here is going to dispute that.
Buckhorn.
To Buckhorn! Alright, so Lieutenant Knox turns up, speaks with Dave Mackley. The great Brent Briscoe, also no longer with us. Jesus Christ, what is it with this cast? Y'all ever tried staying alive much? Anyway, she turns up. She asks where the prince came from, and he tells her, from a body. And she says, there's a body? And he replies with the title of the episode. So this was exciting stuff back in the day, because here we were, very much on the verge of, holy shit, Major Briggs, okay, he's dead, we knew the actor was dead, we knew he wasn't coming back, but still here he is, part of the mythos, part of the core of the story, and apparently a time traveller, and we were so excited.
Him and Nick Cage.
That reveal is in his late 40s and he died 5 or 6 days ago. We were just like...
Yep, time travel confirmed.
And it's really, really nice to see Ernie Hudson back, because I forgot he was back in it. I thought he just did that one scene and it was one and done, but...
Well, don't get used to it, because I believe it's 2 and done.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters 2 and done.
2 and through.
2 and the due.
That's the quality content we have you on for, Al.
Yeah. But yeah, we get Ernie Hudson, and Knox tells him what's up. And while she's telling him what's up, we get our second glimpse in the return of a woodsman.
Yeah, and it was the first time we saw this was really fun, because obviously this is before part 8, which follows, where we start to get the idea of what the woodsmen are, or I say that. We see the woodsmen on full display as a unit, whereas at this point we thought there was only one woodsman, I think. Because I do remember saying, oh, that's that guy whose head floated away back in part 2 or whatever.
Yeah. But upon rewatching, it's obvious it's a different guy.
It is, yeah. It's actually a different actor. I like the touch here that as Lieutenant Knox is on the phone, she seems to sense the woodsman but not see him. To the point where when I first saw this, I thought she saw him. But the fact she just walks straight back into the room and doesn't say anything about it, I was like, okay, I guess she didn't see him. Okay, then. And he just sort of saunters past.
Craig, my favourite of the woodsmen.
Craig Woodsman, as they call me.
I did not pick up on the fact that she doesn't actually see him, she just senses his presence. Because, of course, she would have said, by the way, there's a guy painted completely black walking about out there. Being real creepy.
Is that normal around here? Is that a Buckhorn thing? Is this like that holiday they have in the Netherlands where everybody blacks up? Because that shit needs to fucking stop. She should have said. But
yeah, damn, okay. Right, yeah, that makes total sense that she doesn't see him.
Yeah, I never picked up on that either. Shockingly.
Well, I should clarify. It's my interpretation that she doesn't see him, because I do feel that she would ask questions if she had seen him.
Yeah, as an Air Force lieutenant on a weird murder case, should maybe go like,
who is this guy down here?
You all see the weird guy out in the hall?
So I like the idea that these guys are floating around and that, you know, people can sort of get some sort of vibration from them. As Mike would have put it back in season 2, the only people who can see them perhaps are the gifted and the damned.
Captain Sensible can see them.
He said, Captain, I said what? He said, Captain, I said
Say
what?
After our brief stop in Buckhorn, we get back to Cole and the gang, and this is one of my favourite Albert moments of the entirety of The Return.
It's a beautiful Albert moment. I just want to say, though, before Albert enters the room, I've made a note here. My note is Colin the Cob. So here we see Gordon Cole not only has a massive fucking frieze on his wall of the Trinity explosion, but he also has a corn cob, which we know also, you know, ties in with the entire mythos of the lodges and whatnot. Yep. So Cole knows what's going on in a big way. It's not just, oh, I'm investigating some strange stuff. It's like, he seems to know, this infers to me anyway, that he really knows the ins and outs of the lore. But there's very little that he's letting other people in on, including even other members of his Blue Rose task force, a point which I'll come back to in just a moment.
When they're on the plane?
Do you think that's a metaphor for David Lynch's approach to Twin Peaks' lore? He knows what's going on, but he's not letting the rest of the crew in on it.
You know what? I like it, and I'm going to say yes. But there is part of me thinks David Lynch might be just arch enough to put that in there as that metaphor.
I'll see if they notice. He's on MO.
But yeah, Albert enters, gives us the update on Diane, which is to say there isn't much of any, because Diane effectively told him where to go, as she will do numerous times for the remainder of this episode. Tells Gordon he was soaking wet back in his apartment within 10 minutes. How was your evening, Chief? Knowing that Gordon spent it in the company of a lady in some fine Bordeaux. I love David Lynch's reaction here. All the, oh, this isn't good, Albert. They realise they'll need to try again. They need to get Diane in on this. Albert says it's your turn. Gordon asks him to come with him. To which Albert says, say please. And my favourite moment, my favourite Albert Gordon moment, is when Gordon pretends not to have heard him.
And Albert's wise to his bullshit.
You heard.
You heard.
And it's the pause and then, please. Absolutely perfect.
It's because it undermines every sort of deaf joke that has been in the entirety of Twin Peaks related to him up to that point.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of selective deafness we got. Yeah. Segue then, and this is what I was saying about this episode seeming like it was just, whoa, all the plot development. We literally go straight from that scene to Diane's doorstep. And it's like, whoa, slow down, Twin Peaks. This is almost like an ordinary TV show.
FBI, champ.
FBI, champ. Diane's boy toy making his exit. So this is the first moment we get Diane in her glory, and I love the fact that she's introduced with this boy toy. That communicates so much to us. Like, oh yeah, Diane's a woman in control.
See you later, Diane. And she's like, yeah, no you fucking won't.
Yeah, later. But as Albert notes, now we're getting the personal treatment. When Diane starts dishing out the fuck yous.
I love when Gordon's like, have you got any coffee? She's like, I don't have any coffee, and I don't have any cigarettes either. I fucking love Laura Dern so much.
Yeah, we don't deserve Laura Dern, one of our true living greats. Yeah. But also David Lynch's delivery of, well, now that we've got the pleasantries out of the way.
The memory of tobacco.
But I gave it up.
Yeah, it's great to see these three actors on screen. The chemistry here is so great, and all the information we're getting about Diane, just even on a surface level, is just so good. I mean, we could kiss Laura Dern's ass all day long and it wouldn't be enough, so we probably shouldn't get down that rabbit hole. But my God, she is great. Like, you instantly feel like you know everything you need to know about this character beyond, obviously, the things she is keeping hidden. Yeah, it is great. She's just absolutely commands the screen as soon as she's on it.
She's incredible. No piece of scenery is left unchewed. And it still conveys that she's throwing out the fuck yous, but there's still that obvious respect to Gordon.
Yeah, whether it's begrudging or lingering, whatever it is, she's still got that sort of, there's an element of she respects Gordon just enough to have this conversation to hear him out.
But not the FBI.
Right, yes. It's all about individuals and not the institution.
Also, when she returns with the coffee, this gives us my favourite line of the whole episode when David Lynch goes, "Thank you, Diane." And it's like, it's absolutely heartfelt as
Damn
well.
good
It's like,
coffee.
Hi. And she's just like, yeah, that's Gordon Cole. Yeah, that's the guy.
So an instructive line I kind of alluded to earlier is when Gordon says the thing that I used in my intro for the episode. When he says to Diane, "This involves something you know about, and that's enough said about that." And he kind of glances at Albert as he says that. And it now makes me think on the rewatch that he's referring to something he's kept from Albert, but that Diane knows about, which is kind of what he's referring to in part 17. I feel like it's part and parcel of that. It sort of infers to me that Diane, as far as Gordon knows, Diane knows about the whole thing with Cooper and Major Briggs and Jowdy. Which obviously I couldn't possibly pick that up on the first watch, but looking back at it now, it's like, I think that's what's going on there. Because he sort of glances slyly at Albert when he says it.
Yeah, which is funny, given that we've already found out that Albert was keeping information from Gordon. So they've got this like really close working relationship and like a mutual respect, but also they're both members of like a covert operation.
In classic Twin Peaks style, even people who love and respect each other are all still keeping secrets from each other.
Yeah, in a town like Twin Peaks.
No one is innocent.
As the blurb on the cover of the pilot episode VHS said.
Yeah. Which the image they used to sell that was James on his motorbike. It's like, good one there, guys. Don't think you thought that through.
In a town like Twin Peaks, no one is cool.
No one has ever been cool.
So the FBI, Cole and the gang, now with 100% extra Diane, are on a jet, leaving on a jet plane.
It's at this point I have to take some fucking sedatives because I'm getting too excited here. This is 3 consecutive scenes in a row that I've literally followed on these characters from one location to the next. I'm like, what is this? A TV show? Jesus.
Plot development, it's pacing. It is like, did David Lynch take a holiday for a day and Mark Frost was just like, right, here we go.
Quickly, guys.
Mark Frost snuck into the editing suite. All right, this is my baby now.
And David came back from his holiday and was like, it's time for part 8. No. Do you think this was a deliberate choice to build up the pacing, looking at it as a whole to this point where you're like, oh, now we're rolling, and then he's like,
I do think so. Yeah, I do think so. And then, yeah, considering he'd obviously considered carefully where to place the events of part 8, and so yeah, I do think it was a case of let's get as much of this storyline here moving so that I can place this here. I do think that probably was a consideration. But yeah, like I say, I imagine David Lynch just doing that Tom Cruise laughing gif when I say to myself, oh, part 7, so this is what it's going to be like, major plot development from now on.
When I say 7, Lynch says 8. You say 7, he says 8.
My favourite part of the scene in the aeroplane is, we see Albert sits down with Gordon, and then Tammy just sneaks round.
Yeah, didn't even know she was there.
Yeah,
did she stow away?
Yeah,
she used to sneak on when nobody was looking.
There's the whole. This is when we get the confirmation of the reverse fingerprint.
And we get a classic Albert description where he says some Cro-Magnon at the prison had tried to reverse the print to make it match.
This is the spiritual mound.
The spiritual finger.
You
think about that, Tammy. Think about what, you crazy old man? You're not making any sense.
It's fucking Cole-splaining to her.
The moment where Diane's like, sorry, who are you? It's like Tammy, you know what's coming before it happens.
Fuck you, Tammy. And it's still funny. I remember making that my Facebook status immediately after this episode. Fuck you, Tammy.
Sarah's got a t-shirt which is like a sort of comic book style print of Laura Dern's face at that point, just with the phrase "fuck you, Tammy" on it. So good.
Alright, so then we get the big moment that's something we've all been waiting for many, many years. Diane facing off against Doppelcooper. Man, I cannot describe the absolute chills I was feeling the first time I saw this shit. And honestly, the way this, even now, no matter how many rewatches, the way this scene plays out is so chilling. Kyle MacLachlan, once again, I'm going to kiss his ass a bit more. Holy shit, he's so good at this stuff. And it's nuts that he's not in his career being cast in more roles like this, because he is seriously fucking creepy. The delivery of each of these lines, just the slow, deliberate pronunciation.
And Laura Dern is in full Inland Empire mode here.
Yes, yeah, I get huge Inland Empire vibes from this performance, yeah.
When she tests him and he says, that night at your house, and she's like, with you, like, you remember that night, and his line back, like,
yes.
Oh, I'll always remember. Oh, so fucking horrible.
Also, something else we referenced earlier in this podcast, but when he says the line, at your house, part of me is always like, he's going to follow up with, as a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
I would not have been surprised, and also I would have believed it. The air he has makes me believe that he's capable of anything at this point, so nothing that Doppelkoop does seems unbelievable. You're just like, this guy has so much power. He's not even a guy, this demon that he has so much power that you can believe any shit he pulls off.
Yeah, did you see his house in Rio? Jeez, oh.
Yeah. Miami Coop.
Yeah, I've written it down as Doppelcooper Vice City. The word that always springs to my mind with Doppelcooper is reptilian. Not just because he's got that leathery look and the dead eyes, but because everything about him, it's all about stillness, and it's that way reptiles will just stay in the same spot for hours on end. You know, it's just that sort of inhuman stillness to just let things play out around him, to let other people reveal their weaknesses around him. It's fucking terrifying. It's just, there's just so much weight in his performance. So yeah, this is where we got the first intimation, and this goes back to our previous conversation, that Doppelcooper may also have violated Diane. And it's not said out loud here, but it is intimated to the extent that after this episode, that was the other thing people were talking about. It's like, did Doppelcooper rape both of these women? Because that is horrendous. And unfortunately, we go on to learn that yes, indeed, he did.
But knowing what we know about Doppelkoop, if all of this is taken at face value, that he created the top of Diane after the attack, then he's left the Tulpa with the memory of that attack, which is just doubly sinister.
Yeah, which seems to be deliberate, because from what we know about the other Tulpas in play, that's not something that really occurs, but it seems to be something that, I mean, we don't know the exact mechanics of how the Tulpas are created, other than gold ball bearing and some hair and a funny light show that Mike has to comically shield his eyes from. But yeah, it seems like he's deliberately left that memory.
Well, we know that Bob feeds off a fear and revulsion kind of thing in it, so obviously that's...
Yeah, that's true. So I guess that's a good point. The more pain and sorrow he can leave lingering, the more he knows Bob will be satiated, as it were.
I wonder how much of those acts was Evil Coop straight out the lodge, fresh out and ready to rock, and how much of it was Bob being in control, and if Doppelkoop mastered Bob over a certain length of time. Because we know that's Bob's MO, so maybe at first Bob was just out and about doing his thing.
As Gordon Cole might say, that's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, because we do know that the thing with Diane definitely happened early on, because she says as much later in the series.
And the thing with Audrey happened basically immediately afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Bob could have been totally just out of control, but in control, as it were, whilst Doppelcooper was getting his bearings in the world. Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah. Maybe Doppelkoop's just like, hey, I'll get you your pain and sorrow, just fucking...
Don't eat it all at once, mate. Your Garmin Bosey will still be there tomorrow.
Oh yeah, the other thing about this, like the big Inland Empire vibes I'm getting, was when Laura Dern says, look at me.
I made that same note.
Yeah,
tell me if you've known me before.
Diane's had enough. She's like, F this.
Yeah, when she takes that curtain down, I just love the way that Doppelcooper completely is unresponsive and is still just staring at her the whole way.
What would have been funnier though is if he just like followed down like as the curtain went, just kept staring.
That's what Tyler said on the Talking Backwards podcast, and I was in stitches at it for ages. It's like if he just like started kneeling down, still staring down. That's like it'd be so funny.
Fucking dead eyes, just like.
It's like the curtain ain't keeping her hidden. It's like that's not even obscuring her when it comes down. He's just like, yeah, I still see you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So outside in the parking lot, as you all call it out there, Diane kind of breaks down with Gordon, and she says, "It's not time passing. It's not the way he looks. It's something here in his heart, something missing." We get that awkward hug moment, which Gordon doesn't seem to want to reciprocate. That's an interesting moment.
That's odd. What's with that? Why doesn't he do that? Because the character seems like he'd be handsy at the best of times. You know what I mean?
And that's where my mind goes with it as well. Yeah, absolutely. So there must be. Is he just freaked out? Like, is he in this moment got some of the fear?
Mm-hmm. I think he wasn't expecting Diane and like to have such a visceral reaction or whatever to seeing Coop, and when he's like, "What happened?" and she's like, "We'll have that conversation." Like he's just completely freaked out at this point. So that was what I took from it. Like, because he definitely seems like someone who's not averse to getting a feel of somebody.
Yeah. Was it his first moment of realizing, having it spelled out to him, this is not Coop, or this is not the Coop you knew?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the whole point of getting Diane there was for that confirmation. They definitely felt she would be able to see something that they couldn't. Mm-hmm. And that she's out saying that basically that doesn't seem like it's him. That's why I guess he's just a bit. So the weight of that realization is maybe just taking him back a bit. But it does make me wonder if there's something else on the personal level between Gordon and Diane. And again, Lynch is never going to give us any more information about this, so it's just something to speculate on. But we don't know what the relationship was ever like between Gordon and Diane. I mean, certainly Cooper was the one that Diane had the most contact with.
Yep.
Do you think Gordon would be a good boss or would be a fucking nightmare? What do you think?
I think he'd be a disaster as a boss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think one minute he'd be like, "Oh, we're just having some Bordeaux. Look, let me see your squishy fingers here," and the next it'd just be like, be fucking yelling at you because you couldn't tell what a crime was from like 3 random objects. He'd be like,
the congressman's dilemma.
Be like pretending to not hear you when you were like telling him that the snack machine was broken in the foyer.
It's like, right, you're fucking at it, mate. All sorts of fanfic to be written about that shit.
Honestly, I would 100% watch a show that was just like
The Office, but with the
that would be incredible.
The FBI office. I was going to say just like a straight police procedural about an FBI division where he was the boss, but The Office.
Oh, yeah, I've watched that as well.
That would be incredible.
Parkour.
Gordon Cole is the David Brent of the FBI office. Meanwhile, oh, nice.
Doppelcoop's not having any of this sitting around in prison anymore. He's had enough. So
he decided he wants to discuss. He's decided he wants to discuss fruit with the warden.
Tell him strawberry. Like, fuck off, mate. Like, fuck off. Get back in your cell, you creepy bastard.
The prison guard's just like, not gonna happen, mate. And then like the next scene is like,
tell him. Yeah, again, very next scene. It's like, what the fuck?
Absolutely.
This is breakneck speed. This is like watching a Darren Aronofsky movie. Except without all the boring pretentiousness. Sorry, Aronofsky fans.
Doppelcoop has a sit down with the warden, shows his hand a little, and the warden feels like he's in control at first. He's just get the gun out and he's like, security cameras off, we're going to talk privately. And Doppelcoop's like,
let me tell you a story about dog legs. And this is... this is one of those things that only David Lynch could come up with. And I do feel this is definitely a David Lynch and not a Mark Frost detail. Yeah. That dog had 4 legs, and each one of them went out with some information. Now, my first question is, if this was anything other than a David Lynch project, is why? Why the dog legs? What do you need the dog legs for? Why not just send the information But presumably dog legs are some kind of code in Doppelcooper's world.
Dog legs, strawberries, and
Joe McCluskey, which is my favourite prog rock band from the mid-70s.
Going to see Dog Leg, Strawberry and Joe McCluskey at the Classic Grand next week.
Supporting Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Future of the Left's like spin-off band. Like.
So our villain arranges to have a car and to get out
in the glove
with
compartment.
Ray
Yep.
at 1 a.m. and the warden's like,
Yep.
okay.
And if your mind should drift to a place where I don't make it out if you're alive, just remember the dog legs. A line which in any other show would have people going, I am not watching any more of this shit.
Anyway, how about we take a little trip back to Vegas to Lucky 7 Insurance
Well, don't mind if I do.
for my favourite police detectives in the return.
Detectives Fusco. Yeah, these guys, man. These guys are straight out of that spate of scripts that David Lynch co-wrote with Mark Frost and or Barry Gifford. You know, from One Saliva Bubble all the way to Dream of the Bovine, where they're like teams of absurd characters, straight from a screwball comedy, except here they are transplanted into the world of Twin Peaks. Actually, that on a larger note, that is something that's really quite enjoyable about The Return as a long-time Lynch fan, is you can spot so many of these little ideas that Lynch has been dying to make something out of for years.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, many of his projects just didn't get made. And you can see seeds of these all over The Return. And I feel like, you know, almost everything in Vegas really is straight out of those screwball comedy scripts he wrote in the late 80s, early 90s.
It's so good that he's getting to stretch those muscles that he doesn't often get to stretch. Because he's so good at the weird comedy.
Yeah, the zany comedy he's really got a flair for. Yeah. We should also mention just before this, Anthony Sinclair has a brief appearance where he's trying to get Dougie to talk to him because he's super paranoid.
You were talking to Bud. What were you talking about there, Bud?
Yeah.
He's rightfully paranoid. Rightfully paranoid about what might be going on between Bud and Dougie. And then when Rhonda comes in to tell Dougie that the police have arrived, I love Tom Sizemore's delivery of, oh, the police, that reminds me, I've got a phone call to make.
But see when it cuts to Janie E outside and she's just waiting outside the car and she's getting more and more pissed off, and then she just, like, when she shuts that car door and just charges up, and it's like the way her arms are like pumping to the sides and everything, it's just like, oh, it's like, oh shit.
She charges up there like Orietta Mayflower.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. So a hip Fargo season 4 reference. But yeah, the way this scene plays out is just so great. It's just so funny. The interplay between those detectives.
We hear about his missing car. That's why I'm here.
Well, that's why I'm here. It is like straight out of a 50s comedy.
Who's on first?
I was getting big His Girl Friday kind of vibes.
Yes.
Just the way it's all shooting back and forward. It's so good.
Well, you know, go outside. Why? Because you're fired. Ha!
Yeah, we don't know where his car is. Isn't that your department? Well, yes, after he's reported it missing.
Well, consider this that report.
Yeah, it's just the back and forth is so great.
I love that Bud just sort of comes in halfway through and is just standing watching, like...
Yes, and then he calls it to order just at the right moment.
Yeah.
Bud knows what's going on. That's something I don't know if we've said yet, but Don Murray in this role is so great. And obviously he's from, like, the golden age of Hollywood. And to have that sort of gravitas in these scenes... particularly in these scenes that are so comedic and so ridiculous, to have someone with that gravitas, it really adds a special flavour to the scene. And it's great the way in which, as soon as he speaks, the detectives listen. You know,
Yeah.
They're immediately sort of chastened just by his intervention.
And he leaves like, at least you won't have any trouble claiming the insurance, huh? Fucking Chuckle Brothers, man.
Absolute fucking goons, man.
My favourite thing about the laughing guy is his name is Smiley Fusco.
There's an amazing line that Janie E has where she's just like, there's too many cars and too much going on.
Yes, yeah.
That's my life motto now.
Yeah. Who needs a car? There's too many. As soon as anybody accuses me of not, taking the proper care with anything, or not, rising up to my responsibilities anywhere, why haven't you cleaned the house, Craig? Well, there's too many cleaning products. I think it's time we had less of them.
There's too much going on. There's levels in this scene of respect. It's like the cops respect Bushnell, and then Bushnell respects Janie E because, he's like, well, I was going to ask you something about those cases, but
yeah, I can wait till tomorrow.
Yeah. And it seems like such the screwball comedy scene that progresses the story a little, and as they're leaving, you're like, oh, that was a fun scene, not realising that shit's about to go absolutely sideways in the maddest possible way.
And my favourite thing here in the segue between these two scenes is Janie E escorting Cooper out. And for somebody who's just come into a lot of money, Janie E should be trying to take it easy, but she's somebody who can just never relax. And so she's already kind of lecturing Cooper about... you should have handled this with a car. We could have gotten a better car, but now who knows what you'll get. And it's like, just take a breath, calm down, Jesus.
It's the fact that rambling doesn't stop right up until the point where Ike the Spike appears from the crowd and Coop just goes
into... The Spike strikes. Yeah, this
pushes her out of the way. He's like... Nyeh.
A legendary moment, which I've just put down in my notes in capital letters, Ninja Cooper, where he just accosts Ike the Spike, disarms him, karate chops him in the throat twice.
Squeeze his hand off! Squeeze his hand off!
The karate chops are so brutal.
Yeah. while he's being throttled by Janie E as well.
Yes. But yeah, and then we get as you just referenced, Alan, we get the great cameo appearance by Fernanda Lira from Crypta. Squeeze his hand off to the tune of From the Ashes. Squeeze his hand off. That's the cryptic quota for this episode. Do you remember when this first aired, James, and you and I were just pissing ourselves laughing talking about this the next day?
Yep. What a weird thing
first of all, we get a mini evolution of the arm, which is hilarious visually to begin with. And then it says, squeeze his hand off. That's such a weird sentence.
But he's doing it. He's going for it as our Coop.
Squeeze his hand off.
And he literally squeezes a bit of his hand off onto the gun.
I love the effect of it as well. It's like literally just looks like silly putty.
Yeah. Like does a runner and
leaves a bit of his hand.
Yeah. But when we get that weird directorial choice suddenly of like it changes to broadcast news or something. It's so weird, kind of jarring and odd.
And I think this is unique in Lynch's entire filmography. We've never seen him do anything like this before. Just like this montage of just vox pops. It's so odd. And the way it's all done with that kind of weird spotlight effect sort of distances you from it in a weird way. Yeah, it's definitely not something I expected to see from David Lynch ever. The wee girl saying he smelled funny.
And then the little kind of like the spotlight thing shrinks down onto like the bit of silly
putty as they're shucking it in the evidence back. What have I just seen?
You could superimpose like the end of a Looney Tunes cartoon music over that, I think, really well.
That's all, folks.
It's good. Squeeze his hand off. I mean, I've described David Lynch stuff as being pure Looney Tunes before, but never so
in a
literally.
literal sense.
I love Janie E kind of chiming in on like what happened. She's just like, yeah, and then he's like chopped him in the throat, and I kicked him and said, "You get off of him!" It's like, yeah.
Yeah, how animated Janie E is describing the situation.
Yeah, absolutely loved it.
And I said, "You get off!"
But it's perfect. But it's so perfect. Man,
she's incredible in this role. It's such a great performance. It's such an oddball character. It's one of those characters that's really easy to get wrong, but she totally nails it.
So from the Looney Tunes assassination attempt, we head back to Twin Peaks, and we're like,
we're back in that show you like that's come back in style.
This has been an episode that has had a lot of plot progression, breakneck speed for David Lynch, and has spent a significant amount of time in the titular town.
Yeah.
Whew.
This is why at the time I was like, oh, it's really all heading towards Twin Peaks. It's like, no, it fucking is.
Yeah, especially with the ringing.
Oh, right. Now, do you remember... Okay, let's describe the scene real briefly. Ben and Beverly are just outside Ben's office, and they're hearing a ringing from this corner of the room. Seems to be coming from somewhere, but they can't locate it. No matter where they move to in the room, it seems to move away from them. Do you remember... I can't remember whether we both had this theory, but I definitely remember saying to you, when I saw this, I was 100% sure this was the spirit of Josie Packard in the wood in the wall. Towards the end of the scene, when the camera zooms in on the wall, I was like, oh, here we go. We're going to get CGI Josie face coming out the wall.
I specifically remember us both having that idea. We're like, it's Josie. Josie is in the Great Northern now. She's part of it. But instead, Beverly brings up the key. She's like, oh, you might be interested in this. And Ben Horn has a, we've not used these keys for ages. Oh, this was the room that Agent Cooper was shot in.
It's interesting that's the first thing he remembers.
Yeah, he doesn't think this is the room he stayed in.
Unless that's happening a lot, you're going to remember someone getting shot in your hotel, right? Like that's going to be a big memory.
You joke, but little Danny Craig did not get up from his school desk the other day.
It's interesting that he doesn't say, oh, that's the room that Agent Cooper was staying in. It's like, oh, this is the room that he was shot in.
The shooting is the first thing he thinks of, which is interesting. But what the other note here that I do think is quite interesting is Beverly has no knowledge of any of this stuff, which I guess maybe suggests she's an out-of-towner who's migrated to the town. I do kind of wonder, though, if maybe... Let's go back to the meta. If this is all part of the Cooper Mulholland Drive sojourn in the recesses of his subconscious, is this an attempt by some part of Cooper's subconscious to try and not remember and to act like this is all new information?
I was wondering if it is the Cooper Mulholland Drive and we're in the Coop Loops, that he's remembering the important information, because sure, he stayed at the Great Northern, but he doesn't remember that it had, good water pressure and that the TV reception was okay.
Right, yes.
And that he could put his weird hang upside down bar perfectly between the doorway.
Did he ask for that specifically?
He remembers that he was shot in that room. Good point. I'm wondering if that is the big thing that comes out.
Too. Yep. All right. So that's the that's the Coop Loop spot for that scene. Another note I wanted to make about this scene just before we get into that room, it pans past the reception desk. And it's the only time we see the Great Northern reception desk in the entirety of The Return. And I get such warm... And I get such warm feelings when I see it, because it was such a big deal in the original show. And it reminded me of something, and it's related to the Coop Loop. One of the concierges in the original show was Louis. You remember Louis, who was very excited about M.T. Wentz, who informed Ben about M.T. Wentz, the food critic. The actress who plays Louis... you probably know this, James. I don't know if you'll know this, Alan. But the actress who played Louis in season 2, she turns up in part 17 of The Return as the nurse who checks Cooper out from the hospital.
Oh, really?
I did not realise that was Louis.
Right, this all kind of ties back into the whole, this is Cooper's... not fever dream, but
I feel like it was, because it's got the same sort of vibe about it as the scene with not Ronette in part 3. Somebody we know from the original show, but who's not named as their character. It's the classic Mulholland Drive thing. Somebody turns up with the same face but a different name, and I do think there is something kind of symbolic on a certain level about the way in which.
Yeah, she checked him in the original series, and now she's checking him out.
Right, exactly. And Cooper and her never shared any scenes in the original series, but we can infer that he will have seen her at the front desk when he was staying there. This is happening, guys. The Coop Loops is a real theory. It's coming together.
Hashtag Coop Loops. Get it trending, guys.
John Bernardi, you listening? Get that trending.
Well, the thing that I found weird, well, not the thing that I found weird about this, but one of the things that struck me about this, the cool thing about this, and that gives me an opportunity to insert cool thing yet again.
Another copyright strike.
Is that Beverly is clearly being quite flirtatious here with Ben.
Yeah.
There's a weird sexual chemistry, but Ben ain't reciprocating.
Yeah.
And back in the day, Ben would have been tapping that shit.
That is a good point. And it's like he almost doesn't pick up on it until towards the end of the scene. And when he realises he's like very standoffish about it, like, you can sort of see that in his mannerisms.
Yeah, he doesn't even have that moment of being like, oh, still got it,
yeah,
Ben. You know, he's like, that's not me anymore. Get almost, you know, character development. What the hell? What the hell?
What the hell?
What the hell?
But yeah, that just struck me as being, it's subtle, but it's writ large when you know that much about the character of Ben Horne. And I think it goes back to what you said when we're discussing parts 1 and 2. It shows that character development way better than post fucking Civil War recreation carrot chomping Ben Horne
the
ever
subplot
did,
that will not be named. Well, no, the one of the subplots that will not be named.
However, we do find out that Beverly, as discussed earlier in this episode, is having a bit of a rough time at home.
And quite telling that she's a married woman, and yet she was being very flirtatious with Ben, as we've just discussed. And you know, there's no harm in
guessing with the state of her husband that there's not a lot.
Right? There's a lot. There's a big rabbit hole you could go down here about discussing exactly where psychologically someone in that situation might be. It is quite harmless, I would think, in that situation to just flirt with someone. The question is whether you pursue that further down the way. That would be a whole different scenario. But I can imagine that a woman in Beverly's position, she just wants to feel desired, you know?
And her husband seems like an asshole.
Well, he has been an asshole, but I also feel like he's not wrong, because he seems to know that Beverly probably is a bit of a flirt, and he's getting a bit paranoid about it. It's interesting. This is one of many scenes in this whole season that we're given so little information that the scene sort of becomes us, because we are free to interpret and project so much meaning onto it that is not given to us. So we start wondering about what the backstory is with these characters.
It's also a really nice juxtaposition of Beverly's character, that up until now we've only seen her be very like, yes, Mr. Horne, thank you, Mr. Horne. Oh, have you seen this? And then she gets home, she's just like, don't fuck with me.
Don't fuck this up, Tom.
I didn't want to go back to work. I didn't want a job.
It's like all the little snippets that we get in the Roadhouse, but with just a little more context.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because Beverly's somebody we spend a wee bit more time with, whereas all the Roadhouse vignettes are people we otherwise do not know and never see again. But yeah, you're right, it is part and parcel of that same side universe, if you like, that's going on in The Return.
Speaking of the Roadhouse...
Oh, time for another live performance? Oh no, we don't get one this week. We get something much better. Thank fuck, because I wasn't looking forward to another Au revoir Simone performance. Yeah, I'm mentioning it again. Apologies to John Bernardi. I'm sorry, I'm never going to love Au revoir Simone. I'm sorry.
Guys, cue up Green Onions, because we're in for 2 minutes and 10 seconds of sweeping. I timed it. This is before the phone rings.
Look, a sweeping scene will go on as long as it has to.
Who gives a fucking shit how long a sweeping scene is? Am I right?
Apparently me, because I timed it. 2 minutes and 10 seconds of sweeping. And don't get me wrong, Green Onions is a great track, but...
Yeah, no, it's great. I love this scene. I love the sweeping. This is one of those things that... I love when David Lynch fucks around like this. Do you know one of the things I actually genuinely love about this scene? And it's kind of the same vibe I get from the closing sequence at the end credits of this episode. Is that it's almost like... You know how on Blu-rays you get the atmospherics that they sometimes include? It's just locations from a show or a movie with just the sound design over the top and it just loops. That's what this reminded me of, and I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. I kind of want to hang about at the Roadhouse after hours. This is actually a cool vibe. But it just so happens that David Lynch has literally inserted it into the show. But, you know, whatever.
It's great. In context, it works. It's a fraction of the runtime of the entirety of The Return.
Yeah, no, it is. There are people who get very upset about it.
But it leads us up to just that little bit of another point of things haven't changed that much in Twin Peaks. Because the Renaults are still prostituting schoolgirls.
He owes me for two!
He owes me for two!
Now, the interesting thing about this one is that this has been delivered to us by an actor we're familiar with, wearing the face of a character we were familiar with, but who is effectively a different character. But given that this is the only time we spend with this character, beyond glimpsing him back in part 2, I think it was, it might as well be Jacques. And Lynch does everything he can to make us think, no, in some weird way, this is basically the reincarnation or alternative continued existence of Jacques. And it's almost like Jacques might be dead, but what Jacques represented has not died, and in fact has gotten worse, has putrefied. And so we get this, the same actor, the same face, but aged. And I have to say, right, the actor here, he's really given a gross performance, way more aggressive than he ever was in the original show. Jacques Renault was never that aggressive. he was kind of bumbling and silly. It's not till Fire Walk With Me we see a bit of a darker edge to him, but even then he wasn't as coarse as this. I feel like when I watch this, he's like, ugh, man, no, I feel dirty watching this in a way that I didn't particularly feel watching Jacques, even though Jacques is a total creep, obviously.
It's a straight A performance.
So who knows, right? Who knows what Jacques looked like and what Jacques was into and how Jacques was involved. Coop.
Right. There we go, the Coop Loop, man. And the other thing as well is the character's name is Jean-Michel. And of course, Jacques' older brother was Jean Renault, played by the great Michael Parks. So yeah, I feel like even that, the name itself ties into it as well. The name and the face, it's like an amalgam of Jean and Jacques. Yeah, I think it works. All I know is this scene, as soon as he answers the phone, gives me the absolute bulk. And I think it's the fact that it is in such a, what I was saying earlier just a second ago about the setting of this being an atmospheric of the Roadhouse, because it's such a familiar location, that gives me a warm feeling. And then to have that disrupted and immediately putrefied by this, it's like, all right, Lynch, you got me again. Incidentally, on the subject of Roadhouse performances, we don't get one this week because apparently we missed it. We were too late. The Roadhouse is shut. But hey, you know who should play the Roadhouse? Little Sims. That's who we need. Who Little Sims? I saw she performed on Jimmy Fallon this week, James. So she's officially almost as famous as you.
Outstanding. Me and Little Sims hanging out, playing at 30 Rock. For the benefit of our listeners who may not be aware, I have performed on the Jimmy Fallon
I'll
show.
add the link again in the show description.
Yeah. Back when I did it, it was late night with Jimmy Fallon before he took over the Tonight Show. But still, same building.
Before he sold out.
Yeah.
Indie Jimmy Fallon is your pal.
Back when he was cool. Jimmy Fallon was never cool. He's never been cool, as Shelley Johnson would say. So Coop flies the Coop. He flew the Coop. Coop gets his ass out of jail along with smuggled Ray.
Yep.
I've missed that smug face.
Yeah, it's a great face. The smuggest guy in the universe. Yeah, so they get their shitty rental car. Coop gets his phone and presumably gets his friend in the glove compartment. We shall see. And Warden Murphy looks on ominously, a la Leland Palmer might through Laura Palmer's bedroom window as she drives off with James.
And at the time, again, I was still like, apart from the sweeping scene, everything's projected the plot forward. This is going at such a pace. I was like, I can't wait to see all of this, like where this goes in the next part. No idea what was coming, obviously.
Yep. Hey, you like that rug?
That brings us nicely to the end of part 7 with one of the most fucking confusing scenes of the entirety of the return.
I absolutely love the debate that this has stirred up in the fan base. It's so great.
Hey!
So, to describe it for listeners who for some reason might not know, it's just it's an evening scene of the Double R Diner.
I will say though, it is the Double R at its absolute busiest. I don't know if we've ever seen it this busy before.
Yeah. It's shot from one angle, facing the door. Mm-hmm. A guy comes in and says, "Anybody see Billy?" And as that happens, it cuts to the other side, still facing the door. Ren just runs off. And when it cuts back to the previous angle...
all the patrons have changed.
All the patrons have changed. The staff are in the different positions. Like, Heidi isn't where she was. And Shelley turns around and looks confused as fuck by all of this, which I'd never picked up on before.
I did not pick on it this time either.
She pauses and looks around. First time I ever saw this, I thought she was looking to see if anybody knew what the fuck that guy was talking about.
That's the way I took it.
Yeah, but the more I rewatch it, I'm like, oh, you can definitely interpret it as Shelley senses something odd.
What the fuck just happened?
Because there's no feasible way that was a mistake in continuity, right? That's impossible that they were just like, oh, we forgot to get the reverse angle. Get some more people in. No one's going to notice. The internet won't notice my continuity of literally every person being different.
The other thing that sets it off for me is maybe a deliberate signal by Lynch is the soundtrack. We get that great track, Sleepwalk, who I forget the artist, but it's a great track, and it's a classic Lynch vibe. It incidentally is used in the soundtrack to the 1992 movie Stephen King's Sleepwalkers, starring Major Emick. Intertextual link there. But as that's playing, underneath it and rising in volume as the credits roll is this creepy droning track from season 2 of Twin Peaks, which was quite often used when Wendell Merrill was out about and up to no good.
When he'd got his Tam Shepard's delivery in for the day.
I believe it's the music used in one scene, for example, when Cooper returns to his hotel room and finds the death mask in his room that Wendell Merrill has left there. It's that track that's playing in that moment. That's what's playing underneath Sleepwalk in these end credits.
So there's got to be some meaning to it.
I feel like David Lynch is definitely saying this seems wholesome, but something else is happening. I mean, the obvious thing is he's just reminding us, something sick is underneath the wholesomeness. But I also feel like this fuckery with the change of angles and the change of patrons is like, oh, there's definitely something else going on there.
This isn't the Twin Peaks you knew. Also, this isn't the Twin Peaks you knew 20 seconds ago.
I'll see you again in 25 seconds.
The more times I've seen it now, I'm convinced that Shelley's reaction is to the change rather than...
Menopause? Or...
I mean... Wood's menopause.
Not all menopause.
I mean... I do suspect this is something that was just done in editing. I don't think that Lynch would have directed Major Emick to act like something strange happened to do with the changing of patrons. I suspect the changing of patrons is something Lynch just came up with in the editing. But I don't believe, as much as Lynch fucks around and does a lot of stuff that's very cryptic to all of us...
He fucks around, we don't find out.
Right. And never a truer statement has ever been made about the work of David Lynch. I think he does it for his own reasons. He at least subconsciously knows what the reason is, and it's for the rest of us to never know.
But yeah, that's how we end part 7.
That is a wrap on Twin Peaks The Return part 7. There's a body, all right. Those are end credits, all right. That is a confusing edit, all right. Oh.
I've already said, at the time, I assumed that the next episode would be another plot-filled Twin Peaks continuation, not realising the literal bomb David Lynch was about to set off on television and completely redefine what can be done with the medium.
What I can only describe as the most audacious bait and switch that's ever been committed against an audience in the history of television.
Yeah, take that, WandaVision. How were you feeling the first time you saw this episode, Alan?
I think we were watching it in like massive chunks kind of thing, so I probably had seen maybe like 3 or 4 episodes the first sitting.
I think,
and then
if I remember correctly, we actually watched part 8 immediately after this. I think we watched them in the same night.
I think we finished with part 8 in like my second sitting or whatever, so like it kind of just becomes... That's episode 2 for me almost. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right, yeah.
So like we're kind of like midway through the second episode in my brain, such as it is.
Because it was made basically like an 18-hour movie that just happened to be shown in chunks, it's easy to consider any part being part 1 or part 2 depending on how much of it you've watched. So.
Yeah, but watching it yesterday, I watched it yesterday and I watched it again this morning. Just that did kind of strike me as like how much quicker, how much more things happened in this one than seems to have happened in previous episodes. And then I obviously knew what the fuck was coming up next. I was just like, okay, like buckle up, Alan. Because I've only seen episode 8 once, and that was like when I watched it with Craig before, so I won't say anything because we'll talk about it next time, but obviously I know where it kind of leads to, and it's just, I'm quite excited to see it again, just to see what I'm going to get from it the second time around. Like, obviously I've spoken already that I don't remember exactly where the whole show goes, so...
This is exciting, Alan. It's going to be like talking to you watching it for the first time.
You told me earlier, Craig, that even though we decided to do like single episodes at a time now, that you immediately watched episode 8 after this again, didn't
I did,
you?
but because I know I'm going to watch it again before I take my notes, I didn't take any notes watching part 8 when I watched it yesterday. But I just thought I'll take the opportunity to watch it again, and man, it's such an experience, part 8. It really is. I mean, in some ways, and I know people have, I do feel like maybe this has been overstated to the point where it's starting to ring a bit false, but there's a certain truth about it that at least elements of it, you can see in some ways that this is sort of David Lynch's ultimate cosmic magnum opus. Like, it's not just the origins of the evil in Twin Peaks. There's a sort of, if you really take Lynch's film work in totality, there's a way of looking at it where you can kind of see it as all of the cosmic and spiritual themes that run through his work, they all sort of have a thematic and aesthetic connection to everything that's going on in part 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return. So as a long-time Lynch fan, on that level, it's also just, it's a joy to rewatch and just like really get immersed in it and really kind of look at it in slightly different ways and find, you know, new little details that maybe you think slightly differently about. For an episode of television, by the way, that's an hour in which very little actually quote-unquote happens, like, let's bear in mind there's a good 10 minutes at least that is literally explosions.
Sounds a lot like a Hollywood blockbuster
right,
to
yeah.
me.
People say
David Lynch directing the new Transformers
people say
movie.
David Lynch can't do Hollywood blockbusters. Well, check this out. Beat that, Michael Bay. But yeah, nonetheless, it's one of those things where you sort of, like everything we were just saying about this episode, a few times we've said this, where things are so opaque, you start to project your own meaning onto it, and that's where David Lynch's work is kind of powerful. Like, he will give you just enough meaning through his own aesthetics, but after that it's up to you to provide what you can bring. And so if you come to that part being familiar with David Lynch's work in general, it's very easy to start thinking about a united cosmos of the Lynchian universe, you know.
The DLCU.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Coming your way on Disney Plus. Starting, of course, with the Straight Story. But yeah, okay. I think that just about wraps it up for this episode of fSobrieTV.
Yes, as Sean Connery would say, from beyond the grave.
As this glass of Côte d'Iron is on the way out, take the opportunity once again, we did earlier, but we'll do it again at the end, to thank you for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. If you like what you hear, please do leave us a review, a positive review, ideally.
Yes.
A like, a comment, subscribe if you're on YouTube, all that stuff, all the calls to action we have to do. You know the drill.
Yeah, again,
right
if
now.
you're enjoying the ride, we really are thankful to have you on board. We will be back soon enough with more Twin Peaks content. We will be discussing Twin Peaks Part 8, as mentioned, and then we will be deviating into the world of Doom Patrol Season 3 when that airs for the rest of the year, up until our end-of-year episode. So come January, that's where to get more Twin Peaks content for you guys out there who enjoy that. But Part 8 to come next, so hopefully we shall see you all then. I am just, in the meantime, looking at my bottle of Casillero del Diablo Cabernet Sauvignon, and has this suspicious look about it of, you know, when I look at it at one angle it looked full, but now that I'm looking at it 5 seconds later at a different angle, it's almost like it's only around half the bottle. Doodle pip.
fSobriety, Episode 22, Brand New Jerry Flavor, was conceived by Craig Woods, Alan Todd, and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates, by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. If you like what you hear, why not follow, like and subscribe on our social media, on Twitter at fSobrietyCast, on Facebook at facebook.com/fSobrietyPodcast, and search YouTube for fSobriety Podcast and subscribe there, so we can get our fancy schmancy channel name finally. Don't forget to check out the ever-expanding fSobriety Jukebox on the Black Lodge of streaming services, Spotify, featuring all the music referenced in the podcast. I think I'm high.
She turns up, asks about the prince. Mackley reveals a body, of course, given this title. This title, it's episode what? Given this episode, Jesus.
We'll start that one again.
That's enough wine for Woodsy. Why is he trying to win for the South? What are you doing, Twin Peaks?
We've said it before and we'll say it again. David Lynch is definitely a racist.
Oh boy.
He's got the woodsman in blackface, he's got the Civil War.
I don't know if I should cut all this out or just leave it in to double down on our fuckery.